Chapter 780. The blood-red light from Eastern Wasteland's tower stretched for hundreds of leagues, causing the area around it to look as if it had turned into a blood-red hell from a distance. That bloody presence was filled with an intimidating presence, causing no one to be able to get close to it. It was especially so for the mighty pressure within the blood-red light. If anyone entered, they would feel as if a gigantic mountain was pressing down on them. The closer they got to Eastern Wasteland's tower, the stronger that feeling would become. During the year, berserkers would occasionally appear around Eastern Wasteland's tower. Some of them would also step into the blood-red light and try to get closer to it, but all of them would be forced back by the mighty pressure within the blood-red light without exception. They might not have died, but the will that seeped out from the blood-red light contained a mighty pressure and a warning that no one was allowed to step into this place. The berserkers were searching for Su Ming, searching for their god of berserkers. The entire Eastern Wastelands had been searched through by the berserkers during the year, but they had not found a single clue regarding Su Ming. Gradually, they cast their gazes on Eastern Wasteland's tower, but due to the seal placed on the blood-red light, they could not enter, and hence, they could not verify whether Su Ming was inside. The interior of Eastern Wasteland's tower was different from the blood-red light outside. It was filled with a layer of golden light, and that light was gentle as it filled the first layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower. Su Ming sat there cross-legged. His body had long since recovered. There was a golden sword floating before him, but if anyone took a closer look, they would be able to see a struggling blue light occasionally flashing within that golden light. That sword was the blue sword that had been the main killer in the past. During the year, Su Ming had used all his energy and power to continuously suppress that sword with the help of the mighty pressure from Eastern Wasteland's tower, forcefully turning most of the blue sword, which had been injured in death fog, into gold. That gold was the color of the interior of Eastern Wasteland's tower. As Su Ming continued suppressing the sword, he did not stop for a single moment. At that moment, he opened his eyes, and at the instant he did so, golden light shone in his pupils. He lifted his right hand and struck the body of the sword. At the instant he did so, the golden light around him distorted and surrounded Su Ming's right hand. As he struck the back of the sword, that golden light seeped straight into the sword and once again started chasing away the blue light. The sword hummed and trembled. The sword buzzed and trembled. The blue light inside the sword flashed violently, and it continued to struggle. Su Ming stared at the killing sword and let out a cold harumph. He lifted his left hand and swung in the air. Immediately, a large amount of golden light closed in once again and surged into the sword to continue suppressing it. The amount of power I can't control in Eastern Wasteland's tower is 10 times more than a year ago. Su Ming mumbled. His gaze fell on the walls of the tower around him. Forget about the height of the tower. Just the first layer alone was already several thousands of feet wide, and it was completely surrounded by golden light. Su Ming still remembered that when he had just stepped into this place a year ago, the golden light had immediately rushed into his body. As the impact reverberated in his body, Su Ming had fallen unconscious. When he woke up, his body had completely recovered. The blue sword was surrounded by countless golden threads and floated in midair. There was no way to fight for it, and it could only let out a mournful sword cry. Once Su Ming woke up, he could clearly feel the connection between him and Eastern Wasteland's tower becoming stronger. In fact, the golden light that filled this place seemed to have been formed by some sort of power that he could borrow for his own use. However, at that time, he could only borrow some of that power, unlike now, when he could summon a large amount of that golden light to help him suppress the sword and also refine his body. Life Cultivation Realm is divided into 4 great realms: Life Matrix, Life Privation, Life Palace, and World of Life. According to the words left behind by the third god of berserkers, Life Cultivation Realm is in truth divided into 4 words: Matrix, Privation, Palace, and World. The third god of berserkers' words echoed in Su Ming's head. During the past year, he could not leave Eastern Wasteland's tower because the sword before him had not been completely refined. There was a connection between him and the sword during the refinement process, which was why it was difficult for him to leave. Only once he completely refined the sword and made it one with him could he walk out of Eastern Wasteland's tower. That was why during the past year, besides training and refining the tower, Su Ming spent most of his time thinking about life cultivation realm. The Candle Dragon also mentioned in the past that the path of cultivation for all races is to perfect themselves. Once they use the power of world planes to make up for all the flaws in their bodies, they will reach a state of perfection. I've reached the initial stage of life matrix and understand my own life matrix. If I want to increase my level of cultivation again, I'll need the power of world planes. The Candle Dragon's blessing in the past gave me a fragment containing the power of world planes. That fragment might be the key for me to move into life cultivation realm. Understanding appeared on Su Ming's face. Only with enough power of world planes and an epiphany towards life can a person break through some sort of shackles and evolve everything about themselves so that they can reach perfection. However, this sort of perfection is incredibly difficult. No matter which race it is, perhaps only 1 or 2 people will be able to truly reach perfection over the course of countless years. And the use of blood is to continue this sort of perfection. Due to a single person's success, the entire race's evolution will be changed. Perhaps it's precisely because of this that some of the races in the universe are incredibly strong, and some are incredibly weak. As for the power of world planes, that's the essence of a world. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He looked at the golden light that filled the area around him, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. Eastern Wasteland's tower was left behind by the first god of berserkers. The golden light around here can nourish my soul and fuse into my body to become a part of my cultivation base. Then perhaps they contain the power of world planes. Besides this place, the entire land of berserkers is also a world. The berserkers can absorb the power of world planes in this world to perfect themselves and carry out their training. In silence, Su Ming lifted his right hand and seized the air. Immediately, a ball of seals appeared on his palm, and within it was a sleeping poisonous wasp. God Ascension Nectar. There are plenty of legends surrounding this nectar, and even if most of them are fake, I can still tell just how strong it is. If that's the case, then perhaps this nectar also contains the strange power of world planes. Su Ming stared at the poisonous wasp, and after some time, he put it away. His eyes sparkled, and he fell into deep thought. The first god of berserkers might have led the berserkers out in the past and made all worlds worship him because there were plenty of powerful warriors in the land of berserkers at that time. The power of world planes in the land of berserkers could not sustain their cultivation. That was why they needed to leave. They needed to go to the worlds outside and snatch the power of world planes. In the end, Lai Shanxiu left because he had obtained enough power of world planes. It could be said that he had fused with the essence of all worlds and gathered together a plane, Culpa Sunday. Perhaps he had truly stepped in a plane, Culpa Realm, or perhaps he was still half a step away from it. That was why he had to leave, because the power of world planes was no longer useful to him. He had to search for the power of plane, Culpa Realm, so that he could continue his cultivation, so that he could reach perfection. If that was the case, then perhaps life cultivation realm, the immortal second step, third step cultivation system, and the other races should have a unified name for this stage. Perhaps this title was World Plane Realm. And those who surpass this stage, just like Lai Shanxiu, are plane Culpa Realm. This is also the immortals' fourth step, and it is also the immortals who have surpassed immortals and stepped into the realm of gods, or even higher. Also, when Hong Luo described Dition in the past, he once said that once he fused with the immortal sky, he would fuse with the immortals' world planes and become a lord of a world plane. Dition is one of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. Unless he is the strongest, then does this mean that the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors have all fused with the immortal sky and reached the level of lords of world planes? In other words, there can be many lords of world planes in a world, and their levels of cultivation will be divided based on the degree of fusion. Dtion's real self is much stronger than mine. Based on the immortal's levels of cultivation, he should be one of the best in the third step. I understand now. Su Ming lifted his head, and a brilliant light shone in his eyes. The immortal's third step is the lord of a world plane. Once they fuse with the sky of a world and understand the essence of that world, they will step into the immortal's third step and be known as the lord of a world plane. The third step is also divided into different realms, which is why there are differences in strength. Powerful lords of a world plane can only be considered as lords of a world plane as long as they have not gathered together the sun in plane Kulpa realm, even if they have fused with the essence of multiple worlds. When I came to understand the three styles of wind separation in the past, the Wind Berserker appeared and said that this was the ninth great Kulpa expanse cosmos. All of this was in Su Ming's memories. All of his thoughts over the years were connected together in his mind after he quietly gained an epiphany. They formed a rather complete path of thought that represented Su Ming's future path of cultivation. Before he stepped into life cultivation realm, he had not been able to personally sense all of this. Only now could he understand it in a muddled manner. The immortal's first step is their foundation. The second step is to fuse with world planes, and when they step into the third step, they will become lords of a world plane. In this empty realm, they will perfect themselves to the greatest degree, and from there, they will gather together the sun in plane Kulpa realm and move into the fourth step, plane Kulpa realm. It's the same for the berserkers. If there's a division, then the initial stage will be those below great completion in the berserker soul realm. It will be their foundation so that they will be able to search for true completion. The middle stage will be those in life cultivation realm. They will move from life matrix to world of life, and in the end, they will reach the same level as the immortals lords of a world plane. They will step into the later stage of the berserker's cultivation realm. I still don't know the details of that realm, but no matter what, it is an attempt to gather together the sun in plane Kulpa realm. Once I succeed, I might be able to move into plane Kulpa realm and become a powerful warrior at the peak of the immortal's fourth step, Su Ming mumbled. He clenched his fists, and a strong desire appeared in his eyes. The Candle Dragon once said that even if he had gone to 2 of the 4 great true worlds before, he had only met 5 powerful warriors like this. They are also known as masters of fate, lives, and death in the 4 great true worlds. They control the reincarnation of the universe, and if they want to live, they want to live, and if they want to die, they want to die. The Candle Dragon once said that there are a few other legendary realms above this plane Kulpa realm, and all the people who have reached this realm seem to have left the 4 great true worlds. No one knows where they went. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath. The path of his future path of cultivation had become slightly clearer in his head. I don't want any living being to be able to control my fate. Determination and resolution appeared in Su Ming's eyes. I'll break out tomorrow. Please get recommendation votes so that I can stand firmly in 3rd place. Please get monthly votes so that I can stand firmly in 4th place. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Start Point and give me recommendation votes or monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 781. This week's tickets are very good. Please continue. Tomorrow's explosion. The explosion before the apocalypse. Every explosion is one less. Everyone, please vote for it to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 782. He had come to understand the path of cultivation in the future and found that the berserkers and the immortals were different, but their final destination was the same. Perhaps more accurately speaking, this was the final destination of all the races in the universe. Su Ming knew that he had only taken the first step on this path. He did not know whether he would truly reach Lai Shanxiu's level one day, or whether he would surpass him. However, he had a firm heart and a determined will. He told himself that he would definitely walk to the limit of his abilities, because he wanted to know why he was born a dead baby. He wanted to know whether he had parents, whether he had family members, and where his home was. He wanted to save the voice that had been whispering in his ears for many years, the weak voice of a woman who had called out to him as her big brother. All of this required Su Ming to be able to control his own fate and become a powerful warrior in the galaxy. Only then would he be able to explore and accomplish all of these things. If he could not become a truly powerful warrior, then he could only be like an ant whose fate will be decided by others. Absolutely not. Su Ming clenched his fists and sucked in a deep breath. A brilliant light shone in his eyes, and only after a long while did he slowly regain his composure. He looked at the golden sword with a faint blue glare before him, then opened his mouth and spat out the presence of life cultivation in his body. That wave of life cultivation charged towards the sword, and at the instant it touched it, the killing sword immediately started trembling viciously. Piercing screeches came from within weakly. As those screeches reverberated in the air, Su Ming lifted his right hand and grabbed the hilt of the killing sword. He stood up and placed the sword horizontally before his chest. He lifted 2 fingers on his left hand and pressed them against the hilt of the sword, then slowly swiped them across the tip of the sword. His actions were slow and not quick, but there was a great will filling the sword. As he swiped his fingers across the sword started struggling violently as it shuddered. But Su Ming let out a cold harumph, and the sword immediately stopped trembling. When his fingers completely swiped across the entire blade, even the screeches instantly stopped. If I don't hold a sword in my hand, can it still be called a sword? Su Ming flicked the tip of the sword with 2 fingers, and a clear sword whistle reverberated in the air. That sound reverberated in Eastern Wasteland's tower, and it exuded a murderous will that surged into the sky. With the sword in his right hand, Su Ming started swinging it slowly in the first layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower. As he swung his arm, sword light shone, and sword flowers appeared. Wisps of piercing cold spread out. His actions might seem slow, but if there was anyone else in this place and they saw him swinging the sword, their hearts would definitely tremble. Because at that moment, Su Ming's concentration seemed to have fused with the sword, or rather, the sword had fused with Su Ming, and he had reached a state where he had become one with the sword. After a moment, Su Ming flipped the killing sword in his hand and turned it around to stab the ground. A vast presence and will surged into the sword. It was as if the entire process of him swinging the sword had been for this stab. This caused a large amount of murderous aura to erupt from the sword. When it was about to close in on the ground, the sword let out a violent sword whistle and started trembling, as if it wanted to struggle in Su Ming's hand, but it could not do so. The sword was about to pierce the ground, but at the instant the tip of the sword touched the ground, Su Ming's hand came to an abrupt halt. That one halt would cause an incredibly great backlash if he sent out a strike containing his full power tumbling backwards at the instant he was about to deliver it. However, that backlash was not gathered on Su Ming's body, but had instead surged into the sword. Su Ming's hair danced in the air. His face was indifferent, and his expression was calm. The sword in his right hand was only half an inch away from the ground. His gaze was aloof, and at that moment, he was filled with a chilling presence that was similar to that of a killing sword. As the sword trembled, a shrill sword whistle spread out faintly. The sword trembled even more violently, as if it was about to shatter at any moment. Su Ming had gathered all his power into this attack, and he should have released it to crash into the ground, but he did not. Instead, his power had erupted within the sword, and it was incredibly damaging to the sword's spirit. The sword refinement art was a method Su Ming had found to refine a sword after he obtained the method to use the sword from Hong Luo's legacy. What he did just now was just one of the methods. During the past year, Su Ming had used a few of these methods to suppress the sword, and at the same time, he was also continuously refining it. "Are you willing to worship me?" Su Ming asked languidly. After a short period of silence, the answer Su Ming received from the sword was a piercing cry filled with unwillingness to submit to him. That was the sword spirit's roar. "During the past year, I have asked you the same question every month. My patience is limited," Su Ming stated flatly. He picked up the killing sword and gave it a shake. Immediately, Ripples spread out from the sword. Once Su Ming let go of the sword, he lifted his right hand and formed a seal, then tapped the center of his brows. Immediately, a wave of black smoke manifested at the center of his brows. That black smoke turned into a ferocious face of a malicious spirit, and as if it was roaring, it rushed out of the center of Su Ming's brows and sank into the killing sword. The cultivation method of the evil spirit tribe I learned from the stone statue in the 8th layer is quite unique, Su Ming mumbled to himself. He lifted his left hand, clenched it into a fist, and pushed it swiftly towards the ground. With it, the golden light on the ground immediately scattered, and a wave of earthen aura surged into Eastern Wasteland's tower. It covered Su Ming's left hand, causing it to immediately wither. At the same time, it looked like it was only skin and bones. White light surrounded it. Su Ming looked at his left hand that was now covered in white light and looked like a skeleton. He seized the killing sword, and the instant he touched it, the killing sword let out a shrill scream of pain, but Su Ming's left hand was rapidly recovering, as if he had absorbed some strange power from the killing sword, causing his left hand to return to normal. However, the killing sword's intelligence had clearly become much weaker. The surging indulger's divine ability. They use spirits to refine their own bodies. A smile appeared on Su Ming's face. With a wave of his arm, a large amount of golden aura surged into the sword and surrounded it, then continued suppressing it. Su Ming cast a glance at the killing sword, then averted his gaze and lifted his head to look at the walls of the tower above him. A brilliant light gradually appeared in his eyes. It's time to challenge the tower again. This time, I should be able to do it. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath and took a few steps forward to stand at the center of the first layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower. Once he stood there, he closed his eyes and calmed his emotions, allowing his mind to spread out and gradually fuse with the area around him. Immediately, the golden light around him gathered together and surrounded him. As it spun rapidly, a piercing golden light shone, and in the span of a breath, Su Ming disappeared. This sort of light continuously appeared in the 2nd, 3rd, and 8th layers of Eastern Wasteland's tower. It was especially so in the 8th layer. As the golden light filled the area, Su Ming's body slowly appeared on the ground at the center. After a moment, when his body became completely clear, Su Ming opened his eyes. During the past year, the main reason why he could control more of the golden light in the 1st layer was because he had cleared the first 7 layers and stepped into the 8th layer. With each layer he cleared, his connection with Eastern Wasteland's tower would become closer, which was why he could absorb more of the golden light. With Su Ming's level of cultivation, he should have been able to clear more layers, but when he stopped for a moment at the 3rd layer, he gave up on the thought of clearing it quickly. At that moment, he stood at the center of the 8th layer and sucked in a deep breath. A resolute look appeared in his eyes. He had cleared the 7th layer 3 months ago and stepped into the 8th layer, but only now did he have the confidence that he could clear it and enter the 9th layer. I didn't expect that the test of the 8th layer would stop me for 3 months. Su Ming shook his head. This was something he had not expected in the beginning. In fact, even he found it unbelievable. Su Ming lifted his foot and took a step forward. Once he walked out of the center, the world before his eyes immediately changed. Yellow sand filled the sky, and the scorching sun looked as if it wanted to burn the ground. Before him were 4 gigantic stone statues. These 4 stone statues stood erect on the ground, and each of them was nearly 1,000 feet tall. They appeared indistinctly in the sandstorm and exuded a primordial air. Eastern Wasteland's tower has clearly given me 2 different ways to clear the 2nd layer since the 2nd layer. The first way is to break it open, and then I can continue moving forward. The second way is to fuse with it. Once I understand it thoroughly, I can naturally move to the next layer. If I destroy these 4 stone statues, then I can clear the 8th layer straight away. But if I wanted to do this, I could have done it 3 months ago. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he went under the first stone statue. After watching it quietly for some time, he sat down cross-legged before it and formed a seal with his hands. Immediately, The presence of life cultivation in his body disappeared, and waves of the presence of a berserker spread out from his flesh and blood that had turned into that of a berserker. As the presence of a berserker surrounded him, the first stone statue's eyes flew open, and its gaze fell on Su Ming. After a moment, Su Ming stood up and walked towards the second stone statue. He looked at it for some time before he took a step on the ground. Immediately, the presence of a berserker disappeared from his body, replaced by the pure presence of an immortal, causing the second stone statue to open its eyes. The third stone statue had a ferocious face that made it look like a fiend. There was also a malicious spirit's face protruding out from the center of its brows. Su Ming stood under the third stone statue and lifted his right hand to point at the center of his brows. Immediately, black smoke surrounded the center of his brows, and the face of a malicious spirit also appeared. The third stone statue immediately opened its eyes and looked towards Su Ming. After a moment, Su Ming lifted his left hand beside the fourth stone statue. His left hand was surrounded by white light, and within that white light his hand had already turned into a skeleton, and there was a strange, enchanting light spreading out from it. 4 stone statues. I've already mastered the basic cultivation methods of the berserkers, immortals, evil spirits, and surging indulgers. Eastern Wastelands Tower's 8th layer, activate. Su Ming swung his left hand, and the 4 stone statues immediately became indistinct. When everything became clear again, Su Ming was standing at the center of the 9th layer of Eastern Wastelands Tower. These 2 days seem to be Pan's birthday. Happy birthday, to be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 783. This was the first time Su Ming stepped into the 9th layer of Eastern Wastelands Tower. Almost at the instant he did so, the entire Eastern Wastelands Tower started trembling with a bang. Circles of light surrounded the tower and swiftly spread out in all directions. As they spread out, the first layer of Eastern Wastelands Tower instantly lit up, followed by the second layer, the third layer, up to the first 8 layers. All of them shone with a powerful light. As for the 9th layer, it was caught between light and darkness, and it was changing rapidly. If anyone took a closer look at the circles of light, they would find that there were 8 of them. These 8 circles of light represented the 8 layers of the tower Su Ming had cleared, and they had erupted at the instant he stepped into the 9th layer. Clearly, the 9th layer was a boundary. If a person could not step into the 9th layer, then this change would not have happened. Only those who possessed the power to enter the 9th layer would be able to make Eastern Wastelands Tower shine with such a powerful light. That light instantly covered the entire Eastern Wastelands, and it even showed signs of spreading even further. Almost at that instant, all the berserkers in Eastern Wastelands stopped whatever they were doing. They lifted their heads and were attracted by the 8 ripples that swept through the sky. Even Qian Shun, who was pretending to be dead in the forest, instinctively opened his eyes and looked at the ripples in the sky with a dumbfounded expression. The old man, who was the bald crane, who was chatting endlessly with the 3 young berserkers, was also stunned. The 3 young men before him also reacted in the same manner. At the instant, all the people with berserker blood in the land of berserkers saw the circles of light in the sky. All of them sensed their blood boiling, which had been absent for a year. It was the boiling of their god of berserkers, the faint guidance from their blood. God of berserkers. It's the god of berserkers. The god of berserkers has appeared once again. Booming sounds that surged into the sky rose from all corners of the land of berserkers at that instant. They had been searching for Su Ming for a year, and their god of berserkers had already searched through the entire Eastern Wastelands. They had not found a single clue during that 1 year, but they did not give up. They continued expanding their search area and continued searching. They believed firmly that their god of berserkers would not die. They believed firmly that their god of berserkers was still around. At that moment, when they sensed the guidance from the bloodline, excited shouts rang out across the entire Eastern Wasteland. Rays of light shot into the air toward the source of the ripples. It was especially so for the tribes and berserkers who were close to Eastern Wasteland's tower. At that instant, in shock, they saw the source of the light rings, the bright 8-story tower of Eastern Wasteland's tower. The god of berserkers is in Eastern Wasteland's tower. Excited voices reverberated in the air. Those who were closer to the battle used their full speed to rush over. Eastern Wasteland's Chi Lei, Tian, Shui Sha, the tribe's leader Wu Shuang, all entities clan's great sect elder Tian Shi, and the others were all working hard for the berserkers' rise to power at that moment. When the ripples in the sky reverberated, they lifted their heads and turned into long arcs that charged into the sky. The fated kin did not leave the place where the immortals descended for too long after they sensed Su Ming's existence. Instead, they stayed in the vicinity and did not interact with the people from the other tribes. They lived independently. They were unique. They did not come into contact with other people. They were fated kin. It was as if their lives in the world of 9 had appeared once more, but they no longer faced constant danger. The region they lived in had been continuously modified during the past year, gradually turning into a suitable place for fated kin to bring out even greater combat prowess. During the past year, they had also been searching for Su Ming and their respected senior Mo. Now, at the instant the ripples reverberated in the sky, all the fated kin stood up in excitement and turned into long arcs that charged towards Eastern Wasteland's tower. This was the action of all berserkers in Eastern Wastelands, and it was also the action of most of the berserkers in the various islands in South Morning. An innumerable amount of berserkers charged through the sky, and their goal was the same: Eastern Wasteland's tower. Su Ming did not know about the storm raging in the world outside. At that moment, he was standing in the 9th layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower. There was an incredibly thick layer of golden light around him, and wisps of the presence of world planes spread out from that golden light. They surrounded Su Ming, causing his body to be indistinctly visible within that presence. As the presence of world planes surrounded him, it continuously fused into Su Ming's body. He closed his eyes and circulated his cultivation base, swiftly absorbing it and turning it into the power of life matrix realm. This was the serendipity of Eastern Wasteland's tower. This was the 9th time Su Ming had obtained this serendipity. When he had stepped into the first layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower all those years ago, he had obtained this serendipity for the first time while he was heavily injured. It allowed his injuries to recover, and as he cleared each layer, he gradually came to understand this tower. This was a tall tower that had been sealed off for countless years. Only the first person to clear each layer would be able to obtain this serendipity. And now, Su Ming was the only one in Eastern Wasteland's tower. After a moment, when Su Ming opened his eyes, his body was filled with an otherworldly feeling. He stood in the tower and quietly sensed his cultivation base. The power of world planes in the 9th layer far surpassed that of the previous 8 layers. The absorption alone had allowed his cultivation base to receive a large amount of nourishment. There's still some distance between me and the pinnacle of the initial stage of life matrix realm, but if I continue like this and clear a few more layers, then perhaps I'll be able to reach the pinnacle of the initial stage of life matrix realm. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath of the presence of world planes in the golden light, then lifted his foot and walked out of the center of the 9th layer. At the instant he took that step, Su Ming's vision blurred. When everything became clear again, a towering mountain appeared before his eyes. That mountain was incredibly tall, and its peak could not be seen in the blue sky. He could only see an endless amount of clouds hiding the mountain within. Behind that mountain was a river in the sky. It was vast and boundless, and it was connected to the ground. The river water poured down on the ground like a waterfall, but it would flow in reverse even further into the sky and fuse into the river, forming a cycle of the river in the sky. Even though the mountain was very far away, Su Ming could still hear the sounds of the river flowing. However, due to the mountain being too tall, a small part of the river in Su Ming's eyes was covered by the mountain, and he could not see it completely. There was a mountain, a river, and a desert on the ground. That desert was the entirety of a land. The sand that was swept up by the wind brought with it moaning sounds that reverberated in all directions, covering the mountain and river in Su Ming's eyes. This was the ninth layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower. The ninth layer of Eastern Wastelands consists of a mountain, a river, and a desert. Those who challenge this layer can bring out their full power and destroy everything, or they can understand the domain in this place and naturally break through. Two choices, two paths. A buzzing voice echoed in the air from all directions. There is a feeling of time to that voice, as if it had existed in this place for a very, very long time. This was not the first time Su Ming heard this voice. All those who stepped into the tower for the first time would hear this voice, but it would only happen once. When they stepped into the tower a second time, it would no longer appear. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He took a step forward, and in an instant his body disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already standing on a mountain rock protruding out from the middle of the mountain. As he stood there, he cast his gaze forward, and the river in the sky appeared incredibly clearly before his eyes. The river in the sky was vast, and the booming sounds of water spread through the area. However, by the looks of it, the distance between the river and this place did not seem to have changed compared to when he had just stepped out of the center of the ninth layer. In silence, Su Ming lifted his head and looked at the tall mountain under his feet. With one move, he turned into a long arc that charged towards the top of the mountain. Time trickled by. An hour later, Su Ming frowned. He was still in the mountain. When he lifted his head, the mountain was still hidden in the clouds and fog. Even if he was already at the highest part of the mountain, he still could not step onto the top. After a moment of pensive silence, Su Ming lowered his head and looked at the ground. After some time, his pupils shrank. There's no end to this mountain, Su Ming mumbled. He had thought that the mountain was very tall when he first saw it, but now that he stepped on it, he could see some clues. The mountain seemed to be boundless, and every single time he moved a certain distance, the mountain would increase in size. Because of that, there was no end to the mountain, and neither was there a peak. After a moment of silence, Su Ming turned into a long arc and left the mountain to charge towards the river in the sky in front of him. However, no matter how fast he traveled, the distance between him and the river in the sky remained the same. It was as if the distance between the two of them was the same as the height of the mountain. As Su Ming got closer to it, the distance between them continued increasing. Su Ming had seen something similar when he was at the altar at the back of the mountain where the fated kin lived in the world of Nine. However, the altar was always right in front of him, and no matter how fast he ran, he could not catch up to it. Su Ming might have cleared the altar under the old spirit of Nine Yin's guidance. But with Su Ming's current level of cultivation, he could tell that the mysteriousness contained within this mountain and river far surpassed that of the altar in the world of Nine. Su Ming gradually stopped charging forward and slowly sank down until he landed on the desert. He sat down cross-legged and looked at the barren muslin on the ground. He could vaguely sense that there was some sort of profound meaning contained within this mountain, river, and desert. If he could understand that meaning, then his understanding towards life would become much deeper. Lishan Xiao, you used the appearance of Eastern Wasteland's tower to turn it into an open scheme to make the immortals kill each other so that the berserkers could obtain hope to rise to power. To the immortals, the tower is to allow them to obtain the epiphany towards plain culpa that you left at the top of the tower. And to the berserkers, this Eastern Wasteland's tower is to help them increase their levels of cultivation. It is a trial ground for all berserkers to increase their levels of cultivation. You left behind the cultivation methods for the evil spirits and surging indulgers in the first 8 layers, and you even introduced these 2 races in the 6th layer. There must be some sort of profound meaning behind your actions. A pensive look appeared in Su Ming's eyes. After some time, he closed his eyes and quietly sensed the mountain, river, and desert in the 9th layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower. Time trickled by. Second update, please give me monthly votes. Please give me recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Start Point and give me recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 784. Half a month later, Su-Ming opened his eyes, and a hint of fatigue appeared in them. He stared at the tall mountain, the river in the sky, and the desert on the ground. He could not understand the hint of meaning that existed between the mountains, rivers, and the yellow sand, and the meaning of life. Su-Ming stood up quietly and walked slowly in the direction he had come from. When he returned, everything was as usual. He walked past the mountain and arrived at the spot where he had stepped out previously. That was the center of the 9th layer, the place where he could leave this place. Su-Ming sighed in his heart as he stood at the center of the 9th layer. He did not have enough time to gain an epiphany in this place. He still had many things he needed to do. He had to suppress the killing sword as soon as possible, walk out of Eastern Wasteland's tower, check on his eldest senior brother, search for his second senior brother, search for his master, and fulfill his oath to the god of berserkers, and lead the berserkers to destroy all the immortals in the land of berserkers. Time was of the essence. The immortals might descend at any moment. As he sighed, Su-Ming stood at the center of the 9th layer and spread his Atman outwards to fuse with the area around him. Golden light filled the area under his feet and surrounded him, gradually becoming stronger. When it was about to bring Su-Ming back to the 1st layer, he turned his head around with great reluctance and cast a glance at the tall mountain in the 9th layer. His body gradually became indistinct, and at the instant he was about to disappear, Su-Ming turned his head back to look. Perhaps it was due to the golden light filling the area and the relocation rune causing his vision to distort, but when he turned his head back, a scene that made his heart roar, as if a bolt of lightning had sliced through his head, suddenly made him understand something. The first thing he saw when he turned his head back was the towering mountain. When he looked at it the second time, due to the golden light filling the area, the mountain had become indistinct in his eyes. When he looked at it the third time, due to the relocation rune activating, the mountain had become distorted in his eyes. When he looked at it the 4th time, which was also the last time he saw it before he left, the mountain was no longer there. It had disappeared, as if the mountain had never existed. Su-Ming's gaze pierced through the mountain and saw the complete river in the sky behind it, which he had not been able to see previously. There was no mistaking it. Su-Ming remembered clearly that when he stood at this place, a small part of the river in the sky had been covered by the mountain. It had definitely not been complete, but now the river in the sky was complete. The mountain had disappeared from Su-Ming's sight. Su-Ming's heart roared, and a vague form of epiphany rose in his heart. His body had already started disappearing along with the relocation, but at the instant he disappeared, he lifted his right hand and pushed it against the ground. With it, the ground trembled, and the relocation came to a halt. At the instant he came to a halt, Su-Ming rushed out. As he disappeared, he charged forward. At the instant he stepped out of the relocation area, his body gained corporeal form, and he stood on the desert. He gave up on leaving. Once he stood outside the relocation rune, he stared at the river in the sky that no longer had the mountain. The circulation of the river in the sky became even clearer, and when it became so clear that it could no longer be seen, a bang rang out in Su-Ming's mind, and the river in the sky disappeared from his eyes. There were no mountains or rivers in the sky. An epiphany rose in Su-Ming's heart. His cultivation base circulated with a bang, and he immediately reached the peak of the initial stage of Life Matrix. In fact, he was already not too far away from the middle stage of Life Matrix. Understand now, the mountain is still there, and so is the river. They are in my eyes, but not in my heart. If there is a mountain in my heart, then the mountain will be there. If there is a river in my heart, then the river will be there. That's why the mountain has no peak, and the river has no end. It's my heart that affects my eyes. My life matrix is moving from death to life, from winter to spring. It's the same for my heart. Because I'm in death, because I'm in winter, my heart is silent. My heart affects my soul and my eyes. Or perhaps they're affecting each other. That's why I couldn't see through all of this before, because my heart was dead. But the instant I left just now, the rune distorted and the golden light enveloped me, allowing me to see something I could not see in the past. I understand now. To move from death to life, from winter to spring, the first step is for my heart to contain intelligence and wake up from its deathly stillness. Only then will I be able to see autumn. Intelligence. Intelligence. How can I make my heart become intelligent? Su Ming mumbled to himself as he stood there, as if he had gone mad. A large amount of blood capillaries instantly filled his eyes. He stared at the sky, and even though he could no longer see the mountains and rivers, he still did not want to blink. This state was incredibly precious to him, and Su Ming was afraid that if he blinked, he would wake up from this epiphany. If my heart can affect my eyes, then my eyes can definitely affect my heart as well. If I want my heart and soul to become intelligent from their deathly stillness, then my eyes can do it. Moving from winter to autumn is a process. The color of autumn is red. The color of blood is also red. Let the world be dyed red. Let the world be dyed in blood. When everything I see is red, my eyes can affect my heart and make my heart and soul become intelligent. This will be the autumn of my life. Su Ming lowered his head swiftly and looked at the barren sand on the ground. The grains of sand were there, and when they landed in Su Ming's eyes, he laughed loudly. The mountains and rivers are in my heart. As for this desert, it's formed by an endless amount of sand. Each grain of sand represents a life, and each life represents a cycle of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. That's why my thoughts aren't wrong. Birth represents spring, growth represents summer, blood represents autumn before death, and death is midwinter. Ninth layer, open. Su Ming let out a long string of laughter and swung his arm. As the entire ninth layer trembled with a loud bang, he no longer cast a single glance at the mountains, rivers, and desert. He turned around and took a step into the center of the ninth layer. As golden light shone, he disappeared into the relocation rune. When Su Ming disappeared, the mountains, rivers, and desert in the ninth layer trembled violently. They did not immediately shatter like they had in the previous 8 layers every time Su Ming gained an epiphany. Instead, they seemed to be hesitating about something, as if Su Ming's epiphany was not the will contained in the ninth layer. Even the first god of berserkers, Lai Shanxiu, who had created Eastern Wasteland's tower in the past, had not expected this. He had set up a mountain, a river, and a desert in the ninth layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower, because once he gained an epiphany towards the immortals' concepts, he had never copied them for his descendants. In Lai Shanxiu's eyes, there was only one true answer to the mountains, rivers, and desert. A mountain was not a mountain, and a mountain was still a mountain. A river was not a river, and a river was still a river. This answer was a general outline of concepts in the immortals' cultivation system. It was a law that changed a person's consciousness. Even Lai Shanxiu agreed with it. Once he gained an epiphany in the past, his epiphany towards it had been incredibly deep. As for the desert, it was a barren veil formed by an endless amount of sand. Lai Shanxiu wanted the others to understand that each grain of sand was a world, and that the entire world was formed in this manner. However, the answer and epiphany Su Ming obtained in the ninth layer was completely different from what Lai Shanxiu wanted the others to understand. They might not be completely different, but they were still 2 completely different types of epiphanies that originated from the same source. That was why hesitation appeared in the ninth layer. That hesitation symbolized 2 different types of epiphanies crashing into each other. One of them was the immortal's will, which was Lai Shanxiu's will, and the other was the epiphany born from Su Ming. If he failed to clear these 2 epiphanies, then he would not be considered to have cleared the ninth layer, and the ninth layer would not shatter either. It would return to normal. But if Su Ming won with his epiphany, then the ninth layer would shatter. The hesitation appeared in the ninth breath, and the entire ninth layer crumbled with a bang. It shattered and disappeared, just like how it had happened when someone cleared the 8th layer. As it shattered, Su Ming's epiphany replaced the ninth layer's original meaning. At the same time, the entire Eastern Wasteland's tower shuddered a few times. Another light ring appeared in the world outside, and it spread out with a bang in all directions from Eastern Wasteland's tower. The ninth light ring, was blood red in color. Its original color should have been white. It symbolized the purification and epiphany of a person's mind, the indifference and detachment after seeing through everything. Yet now, the blood-red light brought with it a murderous aura that surged into the sky. At the instant it reverberated through the entire Eastern Wastelands tower. All the berserkers who saw the ninth light ring felt the murderous aura in their blood ignite. An endless amount of long arcs charged through the sky and earth towards Eastern Wastelands tower. Quite a number of those who had been rather close to the tower had already arrived. They knelt down and worshipped the blood-red light around Eastern Wastelands tower. Zealousness and respect appeared on their faces as they waited for their god of berserkers to walk out of Eastern Wastelands tower and lead them to dye the land of immortals with blood. It was especially so for the fated kin. They had arrived a long time ago and were kneeling down on the ground by the side of Eastern Wastelands tower. The zealousness on their faces far surpassed that of the berserkers. The other berserkers were fanatical because of their blood and their god of berserkers, but they were fanatical because of respected senior MO and Su Ming. It was different. It was absolutely not the same. Nan Gonghen was right in front. He looked at Eastern Wastelands tower, and his eyes were calm. However, hidden under that calmness was a volcano about to erupt. He was waiting for Su Ming to walk out, waiting for him to bring the fated kin and shake the galaxy. As the berserkers charged towards Eastern Wastelands, the immortal sects in Eastern Wastelands sealed their sections. The immortals within them could also sense the rippling light rings in the sky, especially the ninth blood-red light ring. The murderous aura and madness exuding from it was enough to make the hearts of all immortals tremble. As the 9 light rings spread out from Eastern Wastelands tower, they covered the entire Eastern Wastelands, the Dead Sea, the alliance of the Western region, and the Northern province. The immortal sects were not limited to Eastern Wastelands. There were also immortal sects in the alliance of the Western region and the Northern province, which worshipped the fallen berserkers. At the same time the 9 light rings spread through the entire land of berserkers, the hearts of all the immortals in the alliance of the Western region and the Northern province trembled. They could sense the madness within the 9th blood-red light ring that wanted to dye the world red with blood. Third update, please recommend me. Please vote. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 785. More berserkers gathered outside Eastern Wastelands Tower. When Shui Sha and the others arrived, they found that there were already hundreds of thousands of berserkers around Eastern Wastelands Tower. There were even more berserkers charging forward in the sky. The breathing and fanaticism of these hundreds of thousands of people turned into a presence that shook the sky and earth. That presence surrounded Eastern Wastelands Tower like stars surrounding the moon, and a madness that could make all races tremble erupted from their bodies. The source of this madness was their blood, and the source of it was the blood-red 9th light ring in the sky. Contained within that light ring was Su Ming's epiphany, and it was a murderous intent that even the first god of berserkers, Lai Shan Xiao, could not fight against. That murderous intent filled the entire land of berserkers. Even the blue sky had returned to its original appearance, but it was in truth a vortex within death fog. At that moment, excited roars came from Su Ming's 9th light ring. Those roars reverberated in the air, and there were even some murderous creatures that looked as if they wanted to rush out of the fog. They lingered at the edge, but they restrained themselves and did not truly rush into the land of berserkers. As the fog tumbled about, the 3 old voices from the depths of the fog were also roaring. It's that boy's presence. That's right, it's his presence. The presence of this generation's god of berserkers. Blood-red, murderous intent. Such shocking killing intent. I feel like I can see the blood-red world within that murderous intent. What a beautiful world it is. I like this boy. I like people with murderous intents like this. If I had known that he would be like this, I wouldn't have let those damned immortals take him away in the past. I would have brought him to Death Holy Land, and he would have become one of Deathworld's sacred children. At the same time, the three voices roared. An incredibly domineering divine thought that was even older than theirs and came from the depths of Death. Fog swept up the fog with a bang and pressed down on the three divine senses. All of you shut up. There was a murderous aura within that old voice. As it reverberated in the air, it immediately caused the three divine senses to instantly fall silent. I can sense a familiar ripple of power from his body. That's the ripple of power that Deathworld made with Lai Shan Xiao in the past. That was the summoning pact between the evil spirit race's spirit guards and the surging indulger race's fiendish ghosts. The ripples of power aren't strong yet. The three of you, keep observing them. Once they become strong enough to summon him, you must immediately bring him to me. In the past, when Lai Shan Xiao left, he brought with him a mission from Deathworld. He went to help us search for the path to the fifth true world, and we must have two races that will obey the orders of the person who can stir up the ripples of power for the rest of our lives. But Lai Shan Xiao did not say that the person who stirred up these ripples would be a single person. He said that all the berserkers would gather together. There are some discrepancies here, but no matter what, over the years after Lai Shan Xiao left, only this person sent out the ripples of the summoning pact. Then it must be him. Death fog tumbled about violently as the old man spoke. There were two vortexes in the depths of the fog. These two vortexes did not move and were hidden in the fog. At that moment, as the fog tumbled about, they could be seen indistinctly. Within one of the still vortexes seemed to be a continent. The land of the continent was black, and even the sky was pitch black. Only the red lightning that streaked across the sky from time to time illuminated the world a little more clearly, allowing people to vaguely see that there were 100,000 people in black armor sitting cross-legged on the ground. These people had their eyes closed, as if they had been asleep for an unknown number of years. They were about 30 feet tall, and all of their faces were ferocious ghost faces that looked like masks. If Su Ming was here, he would immediately be able to sense the presence spreading out from their bodies. It was the presence belonging to the evil spirits, which he had mastered when he was in the first 8 layers of Eastern Wasteland's tower. The other of the two still vortexes also contained a continent, but the color of that continent was crimson. The sky was the same, but black lightning would occasionally appear, causing the land to be shrouded in darkness. There were also 100,000 people sitting cross-legged on the ground. They were dressed in red armor, and when their eyes were closed, it could be seen that all of them were as thin as skin and bones. There were waves of red light surrounding their bodies, making them look incredibly bizarre. They were the surging indulgers. Over the years, the warriors of these two races had been lying dormant in this place, sleeping all this while waiting for the person who could summon them to wake up. At the instant the blood-red light from the 9th layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower reverberated in the land of berserkers and spread out Su Ming's will, the eyes of the 200,000 warriors in the two vortexes shuddered simultaneously, as if they were about to open their eyes. However, the summons from the promise was very weak, which was why after a shudder, they closed their eyes once again. As the light ring from Eastern Wasteland's tower swept through the land of berserkers, golden light shone at the center of the first layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower, and even more berserkers worshipped them in a zealous manner. His body was filled with a murderous aura. The epiphany towards making his heart no longer be in a state of stillness, and his desire for autumn had caused Su Ming's body to go through a drastic change once he left the 9th layer of the tower. There was no one interfering with this change, and neither was there any other existence guiding him. This was an epiphany born in Su Ming's mind, and it was his own epiphany. The color of autumn. Su Ming licked his lips, and a strange, evil glare appeared in his eyes. He walked slowly towards the killing sword, and as he got closer, the killing sword immediately started trembling, as if it had sensed that there was something off about Su Ming. It was as if it had sensed that he had become a completely different person compared to how he was before. The murderous aura coming from Su Ming's body far surpassed that of the killing sword, causing it to let out a wail as it trembled. Su Ming lifted his right hand and slowly held the hilt of the sword. I'll ask you one last time. Will you worship me? The killing sword trembled viciously in Su Ming's hand. As golden light shone on it, blue light appeared and turned into a small blue humanoid. That small humanoid was incredibly weak, and once it appeared, it looked at Su Ming in fear. It could clearly sense that while Su Ming did not seem to be incredibly powerful at that moment, there was a presence coming from his body that made even the sword tremble. That presence made it seem as if the person before it had awakened to something unknown. You are the sword in charge of killing. You should like killing, but all killing is for death. All killing is to worship death, and I represent death, Su Ming said languidly. During that instant, his soul seemed to have risen to a higher level, and the presence of awakening that caused the sword to tremble became even stronger. At the same time, in the Immortals galaxy, at the center of the region filled with endless continents, was Su Ming's physical body, which was surrounded by layers of continents. An aura of death erupted from his physical body with a bang. The eruption of that aura immediately caused the sharp spikes that had sunk deep into Su Ming's body to rise up slightly, as if they could not suppress the rumbling aura in his body. All the powerful warriors in the land of immortals felt their hearts tremble at that instant. As long arcs charged forward through the relocation runes, all of them rushed towards the place where Su Ming's physical body was stored. Abyss Awakening. This is Abyss Awakening. A white-haired old man stepped into the relocation rune with a terrified expression. The fourth chapter was an explosion of 11,000-something words. Please give me monthly votes. Please give me recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to give me recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 786. Autumn has arrived for Su Ming. The abyss has awakened, and his autumn is slowly spreading towards him until he completes the first step of moving from winter to spring. But where's the autumn in my years? Honestly, if I go to the 9th layer of Eastern Wasteland's tower, I will gain an epiphany that will surpass Su Ming and Lai Shan Xiu's. The two of them won't be able to compare to me. I think that the mountain is a new chapter every day. I think that the river is my writing every day, and it flows endlessly without end, and it knows no exhaustion. I think that every single grain of sand in the desert is a ticket, and I wish so much that I can hug them. I wish so much that I can stir up a sandstorm and take away all the tickets. As for the fallen leaves of autumn, they were the monthly votes. What a beautiful wish it was to have those votes fall one by one. Dear demon friends, please give me autumn. Give me a sandstorm. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 787. As the numerous immortals used all sorts of methods to move towards the many continents floating in the galaxy, the corpse lying on the altar at the center of the continent that gave Su Ming an incredibly strong feeling was erupting with waves of presence that caused the entire land of immortals to tremble. The sharp spikes on the corpse were crawling out madly, and by the looks of it, they were about to completely rush out of the body, causing the corpse to no longer have any seals that could trap it. A strange mark also appeared at the center of the corpse's brows. That mark looked like a dried-up leaf, but as it shone, it gave off the false impression that the leaf was about to regain its life force. Cracking sounds rang out from the altar, and cracks appeared on it. Those cracks spread out rapidly until they covered the entire land. As the corpse's presence grew stronger, a loud bang rang in the air, and nearly a third of the spikes that had pierced into the corpse were forced out, shattering in midair. Just as more spikes were about to be forced out, long arcs and the light from runes shone beside the corpse. In fact, there were even people who tore through space and stepped in. There were 9 of them. These 9 people had either turned into long arcs, arrived through relocation, or tore through space. As they closed in, their bodies were surrounded by fog, and their faces could not be seen clearly, but all of them let out low roars at the same time. Their roars turned into a wave of sound with a bang that swept up the corpse. At the same time, the 9 people lifted their right hands at the same time, formed a seal, and pressed down on 9 different spots on the corpse's body. At the same time, a violent shudder ran through their bodies, and they began suppressing the corpse. At the same time the immortals were suppressing the corpse, there was an endless stream of people arriving outside Eastern Wasteland's tower in the land of berserkers. At that moment, there were nearly 400,000 to 500,000 people surrounding the tower. All of them were kneeling on the ground and worshipping the Eastern Wasteland's tower, which was shining with ripples of light. Su Ming stood calmly in Eastern Wasteland's tower with the killing sword in his right hand. His expression was indifferent, but there was a terrifying ripple of power continuously erupting from the depths of his soul. The killing sword in his hand trembled viciously. Under the presence of Su Ming's awakening that terrified it, the killing sword let out a cry of submission. As that cry reverberated in the air, the final ray of blue light in the sword swiftly disappeared. Once it was completely replaced by golden light, it shone with a piercing light in Su Ming's hand. Su Ming unfurled his right hand and pointed at the killing sword. Immediately, the sword charged towards Su Ming's right index finger under the golden light. In an instant, its size changed, and it looked as if golden light had surrounded the tip of Su Ming's right index finger. After a moment, when the golden light disappeared, a sharp golden nail appeared on the tip of Su Ming's index finger. At that moment, Su Ming used Eastern Wasteland's tower's might to force the killing sword that had left him in an incredibly pathetic state over the past year and had even forced him to burn his soul to make it submit to him after he came to understand the will of Autumn's blood and awakened his soul in a state that he did not quite understand. "I like red," Su Ming said softly, then lifted his right hand and pushed lightly against the door of Eastern Wasteland's tower. With it, the door let out a rumbling sound and slowly opened outwards. At the instant it did so, an endless amount of golden light rushed out and shook the entire ground. During that instant, excited roars came from beyond the tower. Su Ming walked out calmly. At the instant he walked out of Eastern Wasteland's tower, surrounded by the golden light, he saw an innumerable amount of excited berserkers. At the same time, Su Ming's statue of the god of berserkers manifested in midair. That 10,000 feet tall statue stood towering in the world. The presence of life cultivation coming from it, the mighty pressure that caused all the berserkers' blood to boil, and all of these things pointed to one thing. Su Ming was the god of berserkers they had been searching for a year or so. Greetings, god of berserkers. Greetings, god of berserkers. Greetings, god of berserkers. The rising and falling voices of the 400,000 to 500,000 people fused together and turned into a roar that shook the sky and earth. It turned into the berserker's will and turned into the berserker's soul. At that moment, as it reverberated in the air, each of them roared at the top of their lungs. Their excited voices could intimidate the heavens, subdue the earth, shake hearts, and roar souls. Su Ming stood outside Eastern Wasteland's tower quietly. He looked at the berserkers' excited expressions and heard the roars that surged into the sky. In the midst of the waves of voices and the berserkers' excitement, a strange resonance gradually formed in his heart with these people. This resonance was an indescribable feeling. It was as if with just one word from Su Ming, these people would be moved because of his words. Even if he had to blast apart the sky, they would still carry out his orders without any hesitation. It was as if Su Ming had become their god during that instant. But perhaps it was not just for that instant, but for eternity. "I will slaughter my way to the land of immortals." Su Ming closed his eyes. After a moment, the waves of voices by his ears grew louder and showed no signs of stopping. Instead, just as the sky and earth were about to be turned upside down, he opened his eyes and spoke languidly. His voice was not loud, but even in the midst of the roars from the 400,000 to 500,000 people, his voice still spread in all directions and reverberated in the sky. As his voice traveled outwards, all the berserkers in the area, even the old monsters like Shui, Sha, Tian Qi, and the others found it difficult to suppress their excitement. Slaughter our way to the land of immortals. This was the united voice of the 4 to 500,000 people in the area. That voice was enough to frighten even ghosts and gods, and make all living beings tremble under it. I will slaughter all the immortals in the land of berserkers. Su Ming swung his arm, and his voice became slightly louder. I will slaughter all the immortals in the land of berserkers. The 4 to 500,000 berserkers stood up and roared towards the sky. A crazed killing intent erupted from them with a bang at that instant. I will make the immortals' galaxy red from now on. Su Ming took a step forward and swiftly stood in midair. As his voice spread out, it was met with the crazed shouts from the 4 to 500,000 berserkers. I will make the immortals' galaxy red from now on. Shouts that surpassed thunder gathered together at that instant, and like a sharp sword that had been drawn from its scabbard, it gathered together the berserkers' rise to power and charged towards the sky. It shook the universe, and even the ferocious spirits in death fog fell silent at that moment. At that moment, at the center of the numerous floating continents in the immortals' galaxy was Su Ming's physical body, which was being suppressed by the 9 people surrounded by fog. Nearly a third of the needles that had pierced into his body rushed out of his body and exploded in midair. The 9 people who were suppressing him coughed up blood at the same time. As their bodies tumbled backwards, they let out low roars and forcefully stopped themselves from falling back. At the instant they suppressed Su Ming once again, 9 illusionary distortions immediately appeared behind them. Within those distortions, it could be seen that there was a projection of a world behind each of the 9 people. Those were 9 worlds, and in each of those worlds, an innumerable amount of immortals could be seen sitting and meditating. They were offering up all their power and gathering it together through the illusions in the projections. Send out the immortal order and tell the other 9 worlds in the land of immortals that Destiny's physical body is going through a drastic change. If no one comes to suppress him, then the 9 of us will not be able to fight back. One of the 9 people let out a low roar, and with the power of the 9 worlds behind them, they pressed down on Su Ming's physical body, causing the needles that had pierced into his body to be unable to leave. Almost at the instant the 9 people tried to suppress him once again, shocking roars reverberated in eastern wastelands. As the 4 to 500,000 people roared, Su Ming lifted his head and looked at the sky beside Eastern Wasteland's tower. His gaze seemed to be able to pierce through the sky and death fog to see the immortals' galaxy beyond the mirror. I am the god of berserkers. I will lead all berserkers and dye the immortals' sky with blood. Su Ming did not say these words flatly. Instead, he lifted his head and let out a roar. As he roared, all the immortals in the land did the same. Their roars shook the sky, and all their wills gathered on Su Ming's body at that instant. During that instant, Su Ming also had a feeling that he could fuse with the berserker's world. As his soul awakened to a certain extent, he came to understand the will of autumn, and as the numerous berserkers' wills fused together, his cultivation base erupted with a bang within his body. As his cultivation base erupted, the sky gradually turned red. The rivers on the ground also seemed to have been dyed in red at that instant. At the spot where Su Ming's physical body was located in the immortals' galaxy, the needles that had been suppressed in his physical body shuddered, wanting to crawl out again. The expressions of the 9 people around his physical body changed drastically. At that moment, a domineering and powerful divine sense charged towards him with a bang. It tore through space and appeared above Su Ming's physical body. It lifted its right hand and pushed down fiercely. Soon after, divine senses with an ancient presence tore through space and appeared, suppressing Su Ming's physical body. If anyone cast their gaze over, they would find that there were nearly 100 immortals suppressing Su Ming's physical body, and all of them had incredibly powerful levels of cultivation. As waves of brilliant light shone, A divine sense that surpassed all the people in the area tore through space with a bang and suppressed Su Ming's physical body. Abyss awakening. Humph. Even if you've awakened, you will still become an eternal devotee of the immortals. As the numerous almighties in the land of immortals and even some ancient existences tried to suppress him, Su Ming's physical body gradually calmed down. The mark of the dried-up leaf at the center of his brows disappeared, and he stopped moving. Su Ming could not sense what was happening in the land of immortals and the land of berserkers. But at the moment his physical body was finally suppressed, he felt as if there was a huge rock pressing down on his heart, causing his hatred towards all immortals to erupt even more intensely. He also had a strong feeling that his level of cultivation was just a sliver away from the middle stage of life matrix. This sliver of distance would require the world to be dyed in blood, and it would require an endless amount of blood and lives to complete. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 788. Su Ming did not challenge Eastern Wasteland's tower. He left the answer to what lay beyond the 9th layer for later. At that moment, there were far too many things he had to do, and he did not have time to stay in Eastern Wasteland's tower for long. Based on his estimations, if he wanted to understand everything about Eastern Wasteland's tower, then not only would he need a sufficient amount of power, he would also need an endless amount of time. Su Ming's murderous aura filled the air. He wanted to turn the sky red and see Autumn's face so that he could verify his epiphany, so that he could move into the middle stage of life matrix. As the 400,000 to 500,000 berserkers around him roared, Su Ming looked towards the ground in the distance. His Atman filled the area, and he only saw one thing, and that was his eldest senior brother's statue at the spot where the immortals descended. The statue was still in its original spot, and there was a protection Su Ming had left behind in secret when he was fleeing from the killing sword. Su Ming did not believe that his eldest senior brother would die just like this. He absolutely did not believe it. In silence, Su Ming averted his gaze. He did not dare take his eldest senior brother away, because he did not know whether his actions would bring more harm to his eldest senior brother. Eldest senior brother, I will make you wake up. Su Ming lifted his head and swept his gaze past the fated kin. He nodded, then looked towards the world in the distance. When he spread his Atman outwards, he found an immortal sect in that direction. Sky Mist Sect. That was Sky Mist Sect's largest sect in the land of berserkers, and it was also where their foundation was located. Right then, the sect was sealed and the rune was activated. It surrounded an area of several tens of thousands of lease, forming an incredibly powerful defense. Berserkers would find it difficult to move even an inch within the rune's area, but similarly, those from Sky Mist Sect would definitely not venture out. Come with me to destroy all the sects in the land of berserkers. Our first target is Sky Mist Sect. Su Ming swung his arm, and his voice spread through the area in waves. All the berserkers who heard his words felt their blood boil, their eyes turned bloodshot, and they let out hoarse roars. They had been waiting for this day for far too long. Finally, the day had arrived. Under the god of berserkers, Su Ming's lead, they would sweep through all the immortal sects in the land of berserkers and turn the land of berserkers into a forbidden zone for the immortals. Tian Chi, Shui Sha, Chi Lei Tian, and the others were the ones with the highest levels of cultivation besides Su Ming. They had seen Su Ming fight against Di Tian, saw the immortals' rune to descend on them shatter, saw Su Ming walk out of Eastern Wasteland's tower, and heard him say that he wanted to destroy the berserkers' immortal sections. They flew up without any hesitation and wrapped their fists in their palms to worship him. We are willing to obey the god of berserkers' will and follow the god of berserkers to destroy the immortals. Follow the god of berserkers and destroy all immortals. The same voice tumbled out of all the berserkers' mouths in a crazed manner. Long arcs charged into the sky, and 400,000 to 500,000 people flew out at the same time. This scene was enough to shock the hearts of all those who saw it. Su Ming cast a glance at Tian Chi and the others. then took a step towards the sky in the distance. He turned into a long arc and charged right in front of the group. Tianqi and the others followed closely behind him, and right behind them were Su Ming's fated kin. With Nan Gonghen in the lead, they followed closely behind Su Ming. At the very back were the 5 to 500,000 berserkers. With a presence that could cover the sky, they turned into rays of light that cast a huge shadow on the ground. As they charged forward, they followed Su Ming and charged towards Sky Mist Sect. Time passed by quickly. The flight of these 500,000 people stirred up a violent gust of wind that swept through the sky and earth. An endless amount of sand and stones on the ground were swept up, and the clouds in the sky were immediately shattered before they could even get close to the group. The wind that was stirred up moaned, and after a whole day, it descended on Sky Mist Sect. Sky Mist Sect was one of the immortal sects in Eastern Wastelands. As the headquarters of the sect in Eastern Wastelands, it occupied an area of several tens of thousands of leagues. There were 18 mountains within it, and each of them had an endless amount of exquisite towers that could accommodate tens of thousands of disciples to train. There was also a circular rune on the ground with the 18 mountains as the center. That rune could absorb the spiritual aura in the world and gather it together, allowing the immortals to continue training. It was especially so at that moment. Once all the runes in Sky Mist Sect were activated, a thick layer of fog filled the area beyond Sky Mist Sect. Lightning sparks could be seen coming from within, and low roars could also be heard echoing in the air, giving off a feeling that all living beings were not allowed to enter. That fog covered an area of several tens of thousands of leagues. Besides lightning sparks and low roars, there was also a dazzling light shining within it. That was the second layer of Sky Mist Sect's mountain protection rune, Ultimate Barrier. Besides needing the disciples of Sky Mist Sect to manage the operation of the Ultimate Barrier, the rune on the ground also needed to continuously absorb all the spiritual aura from the world to receive all the spiritual energy needed by the rune. Sky Mist Barrier in the land of South Morning was a miniature version of the Ultimate Barrier. There were also Sky Mist Immortal Guards in the Ultimate Barrier. These Immortal Guards were all puppets that would obey orders even if they had to self-destruct. Behind the Ultimate Barrier was the third layer of Sky Mist Sect's rune. That rune was known as Four Sacred Skies. It was one of the cores of Sky Mist Sect's mountain protection rune, and within it were the four great laws of wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. They would kill all those who try to barge in forcefully. Besides the Four Sacred Skies, Sky Mist Sect's final rune was Four Seasons Destruction. That rune contained the laws of time from the four seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. With all the lives of Sky Mist Sect's disciples as the foundation, it could reverse the lives of those who fell into the rune. After all, even if there were only 10,000 Sky Mist Sect disciples, if each of them offered up 1 year of their lives, then they would have 10,000 years left. To many people, these 10,000 years meant that once they stepped into the Four Seasons Destruction rune, they would immediately turn into skeletons. As the 500,000 long arcs charged out from the world beyond Sky Mist Sect, the violent gust of wind that was stirred up swept up an endless amount of sand and crashed into the thick fog beyond Sky Mist Sect before the crowd could even get close. At the instant they crashed into each other, a shocking boom reverberated in the air. Hurried bell chimes immediately spread through Sky Mist Sect. At the instant the Sky Mist Sect disciples in each of the 18 mountains heard the bell chimes, no matter what they were doing, their expressions changed at the same time. At the instant their expressions changed, the ground trembled under the booming sounds. The 18 mountains also started trembling. Long arcs flew out from the 18 mountains and turned into dozens of people in midair. These people were not weak, but at that moment, their faces were pale as they stared at the sky. The berserkers are invading us. Maintain the rune at full power. No matter the cost, we cannot let the berserkers break the rune of Sky Mist Sect. All of you from Sky Mist Sect, listen up. If you fall into the hands of the berserkers, you will definitely die. Instead of that, it will be better for you to live and die with Sky Mist Sect. Besides, there's a high possibility that they won't be able to break our rune. We still have hope. I've already contacted the immortal sects once again. Persevere, and we will have a chance to survive." Low shouts that were both soft and hard echoed in Sky Mist sect in an attempt to suppress the panic from the disciples. But at that moment, a violent roar that sounded as if it was right beside their ears came from beyond Sky Mist sect. That voice shook the 18 mountains so much that shattered stones tumbled down, and quite a number of Sky Mist sect disciples started bleeding from their eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. The first layer of the rune is broken. A shrill cry came from among the Sky Mist sect disciples. At the instant all their gazes looked towards the sky, they saw a young man dressed in battle armor and surrounded by the black aura of the god of berserkers was standing in the sky. He had a head of long purple hair that was tinged with black. When he swung his sword downwards, an endless amount of thick fog tumbled backward with a bang like seawater and collapsed simultaneously. Su Ming held the killing sword in his hand and pointed at Sky Mist sect, which was now free of the thick fog. "Kill them!" As he roared, the berserkers who had arrived behind him charged madly towards Sky Mist sect's second protective rune. As the fog was torn apart and tumbled backwards, Sky Mist sect was continuously revealed under the fog. All the disciples in the sect not only saw Su Ming, they also saw the 100,000-something berserkers behind him, along with an endless amount of berserkers who blotted out the sky and earth behind them. All of those berserkers' eyes were bloodshot, and within them was hatred and madness towards the immortals that was carved into their bones. Wu La stood on the second mountain with a pale face and looked at Su Ming and the berserkers outside the rune in the sky. Her expression changed, and gradually, the complicated look on her face disappeared. Instead, she let out a sigh, and as she did so, she tightened her grip around the bells in her hands. On another mountain was Tian Lanyu. Her face was also pale, but there was an endless chill within it as she glared at Su Ming in the sky. There was also a woman standing quietly by her side. She was Tian Lanmeng. She looked at Su Ming beyond the sky, and the memories of the past surfaced in her head. They had met in the past and traveled together, and they had formed a rather good impression of each other. Due to their separation during the Great War between the shamans and berserkers, this beautiful memory that might have existed had turned to dust. When they reunited in the world of Ninein, she had hesitated once. She would never forget the grief and understanding that had appeared on Su Ming's face at that time. Is this fate? Tian Lanmeng bit her bottom lip, and tears fell from her eyes. As the fort of 500,000 people charged towards Sky Mist Owl, and Su Ming walked towards the second layer of defense with the killing sword in his hand, Qinshin was lying on the ground in a forest near Evil Spirit Sect that was located quite far away from Sky Mist Owl, continuing to play dead. Before him was an incredibly beautiful girl. She was blinking and holding a bag of melon seeds in her hands. As she munched on them, she threw the shells on the ground. There was a big yellowish-brown dog by her feet, and that dog was sticking out its tongue lazily to continuously roll up the shells of the melon seeds and swallow them. The old man, that was the bald crane, had turned and had the presence of a powerful warrior on him. He had an enigmatic look on his face, as if he was afraid that others would not know that he was a powerful person. He was talking nonstop to the girl. "Are you saying that this generation's god of berserkers, Su Ming, is your disciple?" The girl widened her eyes, and an innocent look appeared on her face. There was also a look of admiration on her beautiful face. "I must correct you, lass. That Su Ming is not my disciple. His father is my disciple in name. That's why, in general, this boy Su Ming can call me Grandmaster. There is nothing about him that I don't know. If there is anything you want to know, I can tell you." The old man let out a cough and spoke flatly. "Do you still have monthly votes? I've already dropped one place. To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to Kamachidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 789. Then how old is this god of berserkers, Su Ming? The girl blinked and looked at the old man before her with a grin. She put the melon seed in her mouth and bit into it. Others might not know about this Su Ming, but I know him far too well. As the old man that was the bald crane continued talking, the yellow dog under the girl's feet cast the old man a sideways glance and shook its head. There was a hint of pity in its eyes, and it moved slowly to Qian Chen's side, who was still pretending to be dead on the ground. Circling around Qian Chen's body, the yellow dog raised its nose and sniffed carefully. Then, it stuck out its tongue and licked Qian Chen's face a few times. Large amounts of saliva flowed down, but Qian Chen didn't dare to move. His heart could not help but race against his chest. He shut his eyes tightly, but he could still sense the bloody stench coming from the wet tongue. But this was not the main point. The main point was that he was a person who had descended to the land of berserkers. He might not be an immortal, but he had a unique divine ability. This divine ability did not contain any offensive properties. It could only allow him to see through the truth of an item. It was quite popular among the younger generation in his tribe, and it was an art that they needed to use when they traveled the world. This divine ability could allow them to see many treasures that other people could not. It could also allow them to see through things, as if they had all-seeing eyes. In fact, Qian Chen's ability to use a unique method to descend to the land of berserkers was indirectly related to this divine ability. When he first met the bald crane, he had used this divine ability to tell that this person was a bald crane. Besides, this person had called himself Old Crane, which was why he kept referring to himself as Grandpa Crane and Grandpa Crane. It was because of this that the bald crane saw how smart he was and pulled him into its companion. At that moment, as the mutant dog continued licking him with its tongue, Qian Chen's heart trembled. He had a feeling that there was something off about the mutant dog. The bloody stench in its mouth made him instinctively cast this divine ability and spread his mind slightly to look at the mutant dog beside him. Qian Chen was stunned by what he saw. His eyes even widened as he stared at the mud in shock. Under his spell, this wasn't a mud at all. It was clearly a yellow dragon. Furthermore, it looked extremely ferocious. Looking at him, it stuck its tongue out and licked Qian Chen's face, causing huge amounts of dragon saliva to drip down. In fact, Qian Chen could even tell that the yellow dragon's eyes seemed to want to swallow him whole. Nothing could make Qian Chen despair more than an evil dragon licking him. Under this intense fear, his eyes rolled back and he fainted. This time, he really fainted. However, before he fainted, he could vaguely hear the bald crane's ancient words. Lass, there are too many things about the god of berserkers in the past. My mouth is dry from talking about them. By the way, why aren't your seniors here yet? Back then, we had an agreement that if you wanted to recruit an expert like me, you would need someone of similar status to me. Oh well, I'm a little hungry now. How about this? I see that this mutant dog is pretty fat. Why don't we kill it and make it into a pot of fragrant meat? This was the bald crane's voice Qian Chen heard before he fainted. That was why Qian Chen decided to fainted without any hesitation. At the same time, booming sounds surged into the sky from the region where Sky Mist Dao was located in the distance. They were deafening and reverberated in all directions, causing the ground within Sky Mist Dao's territory to tremble. Cracks appeared in the sky. 500,000 people surrounded Sky Mist Dao. The murderous aura and madness spreading out from their bodies had practically gained corporeal form as they pressed down on the 18 mountains protected by Sky Mist Dao's rune. This sort of mighty pressure was something Sky Mist Dao could not fight against. Even if they struggled, they would still be destroyed under that mighty pressure. This was a madness formed by the wills of 500,000 people fusing together to form a destructive force. Su Ming stood right in front. Behind him, Qi Lei Tian and the others accompanied him. At that moment, Qi Lei Tian might have mixed feelings in his heart, but he no longer had any thoughts of retrieving the lightning crystal from Su Ming. In truth, when he first saw Su Ming in the land where the immortals descended a year ago, he had already noticed that Su Ming was the person from the land of South Morning who he thought deserved to die all those years ago. He was the one who had snatched away half of his lightning crystal. He had followed his will in the past and uttered those harsh words that could fill the sky. However, once he discovered that Su Ming was that person, all sorts of feelings rose in his heart, and in his anguish, he gave up on that thought. In fact, when he remembered the harsh words he had uttered in the past, he felt incredibly regretful. He had mixed feelings in his heart, and when he saw the presence that was so strong that it was almost suffocating coming from Su Ming's body, he decided to show off his abilities without caring about anything else. In Chile Tian's eyes, this was perhaps the only way to prevent Su Ming from causing trouble for him in the future. Su Ming moved forward with a calm expression. As the fog formed by the first layer of sky, Miss Dao's rune tumbled backwards. The second layer of the rune was revealed. It was the vast screen of light that Sky Miss Dao called the ultimate barrier. That screen of light surrounded the entire Sky Miss Dao. In fact, if anyone looked at it for a longer period of time, they would find that the screen of light was not just a thin layer. It had formed a wall that protected Sky Miss Dao within it. An endless amount of spiritual energy spread out from the ground and fused into the wall to maintain its operation. In fact, there would be a Sky Miss Dao disciple sitting indistinctly every 100 feet within the circular wall, causing the defensive power of the second layer to surpass that of the first layer. At the same time, there were nearly 100 powerful presences. Each of those presences possessed a rather high level of cultivation, but they were not sentient. Instead, they were puppets that existed because of the rune. They could not leave Sky Miss Dao. They were born because of the ultimate barrier, but they were the best form of defense for Sky Miss Dao. Once Su Ming swept his gaze past the ultimate barrier, he said flatly, "Break it." As his words traveled outwards, Chile Tian and the others immediately charged towards the barrier. At the same time, the 400,000 to 500,000 people in the area threw a punch towards the ultimate barrier at the same time as the mighty pressure and roars spread out from their bodies. In Su Ming's eyes, he did not need any skill to break Sky Miss Dao's rune. He did not need to understand the operation of the rune, and he did not need to think about how to avoid it. He only needed one punch. With a punch from 400,000 to 500,000 people, with a forceful stance and extreme violence, he would break the ultimate barrier. This was an upright punch. The punch that gathered the power of hundreds of thousands of berserkers, and their explosive power was like a savage, frenzied dragon that swiftly charged into the ultimate barrier that protected Sky Miss Dao. Nearly 100 golden light shone on the ultimate barrier, and nearly 100 puppets appeared. As they appeared, almost the moment they touched the power gathered together by the hundreds of thousands of berserkers, a shocking boom rang in the air, and those puppets were instantly wiped off and reduced to ashes. They could not stop the attack in the slightest, allowing the frenzied dragon formed by the power of hundreds of thousands of berserkers to crash into the ultimate barrier. Booming sounds instantly spread through a small part of eastern wastelands, and the barrier formed by the screen of light instantly let out a sound that it could no longer withstand the force. As it shattered inch by inch, the thousands of Sky Miss Dao disciples sitting on the barrier shattered and tumbled backwards along with the barrier. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, the barrier shattered. Fourth god of berserkers, even if you berserkers manage to destroy Sky Miss Dao today, there will come a day when we immortals will come with a large force and destroy your entire bloodline. A shrill roar came from within Sky Miss Dao's crumbling barrier. It came from an old man, and only a small part of his body remained by then. His voice was filled with endless hatred. "You immortals have killed many of us berserkers. Once the first god of berserkers left, you cruelly tore the second god of berserkers apart and sealed Great U Imperial City. Then, you sent a large number of immortals to massacre us berserkers. Over the years, the number of berserkers who have died in your hands is more than 10 million. The immortals must die. My tribe, my family, all of them were killed by the immortals, and all of you did it for the sake of creating one drop of berserker blood. All my children died in the hands of the immortals. To me, you have already destroyed my bloodline, so I will make you pay the price. I am the only one left in my tribe, and that's because my tribe is located in a spirit mine. Roars rose into an uproar when that shrill voice spoke. Those were the voices of the hundreds of thousands of berserkers in the area, and they were filled with their hatred and madness towards the immortals. This was a war between two races. Perhaps there were people who had not stained their hands with the blood of both sides in this war. But even so, when one side of this gigantic race was destined to be destroyed, they could only go with the flow, and gradually, they would also be dragged into the slaughter of the other race. There was no right or wrong in this war. Perhaps there was only a sigh. Su Ming lifted his head and looked at the shrill and vengeful old man gradually disappearing. Then, he lifted his right hand, and, as the berserkers around him roared, he struck the third layer of protection for sacred skies. When his palm landed, the 10,000 feet statue of the god of berserkers manifested before Su Ming, and it also struck the third layer of protection. As rumbling sounds reverberated in the air, wind, rain, thunder, and lightning stirred up within the four sacred skies rune and spread outwards. The berserkers' levels of cultivation were uneven. As four sacred skies spread outwards, a large number of them immediately coughed up blood, and some even died as their bodies crumbled. However, even more berserkers charged past Su Ming as if they had gone mad and rushed towards the four sacred skies rune with bloodshot eyes. This was not Su Ming's battlefield alone. This was the battlefield of all the berserkers. Under the protection of the rune, the immortals within the 18 summits of sky, mist, Tao looked at the sky quietly with pale faces. Despair appeared on their faces. The shadow of death was descending upon them in large numbers. Once the rune crumbled, only death would await them. I'll use a pot of spicy meat to ask for a vote. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 790. The booming sounds from four sacred skies and the third layer of sky, mist, Tao, continued viciously. The rune might be incredibly powerful, and the four great laws of wind, rain, thunder, and lightning contained an endless amount of destructive power. However, no matter how endless that destructive power was, it could not suppress the 500,000 berserkers' crazed charge. They were fighting without care for anything else, a counterattack formed by their hatred towards the immortals to rise to power. The rune lasted for a moment, but that so-called endless destruction could not last for long. A large number of berserkers died, but they died willingly. They died for their people and for the berserkers to rise to power. They died without regrets. Even Su Ming could not stop the berserkers from dying as they fought against the immortals for the sake of rising to power. If he forcefully stopped the berserkers' attack and went to fight against Sky Mist Dao's rune alone, then perhaps with his own strength, he might be able to break through Sky Mist Mountain's gate. But if that was truly the case, then this war would not be between the berserkers and the immortals, but between Su Ming and the immortals. If that was truly the case, then the berserkers would not rise to power. Even if they did rise to power, then it would be Su Ming who would rise to power, not the berserkers. A race needed blood, sacrifices, and willpower to rise to power. Su Ming looked at the berserkers beside him, whose eyes were bloodshot with madness. The only thing he could do was to lead them and break the rune. Su Ming moved forward, and as he circulated his cultivation base based on his life matrix, he lifted his foot and took a swift step forward. Instantly, the world rumbled, and a huge foot appeared in the sky. This was the god of berserkers' 7 steps. That foot stomped on Sky Mist Dao's 4 sacred skies, rune 7 times in a row. As the rune trembled, an innumerable amount of berserkers charged forward madly, using their bodies, their flesh and blood, their cultivation bases, and everything else they could to crash into the rune. Booming sounds surged into the sky at that instant. Tens of thousands of berserkers died, but at the same time, the 4 sacred skies rune crumbled. Once the 4 sacred skies rune crumbled, there was only one final protective rune between the immortals and the Berserkers. 4 Seasons Destruction. This spell formation was extremely terrifying. It didn't have any physical attacks, nor did it have any soul-destroying power. What it contained was a power that moved from spring to winter. It could cause a person to experience the changes of the 4 seasons, from life to death, using an equivalent amount of lifespan to extinguish a person's flame of life. Disciples of Sky Mist Owl, we are immortals. Even if we die, we will die while destroying the Berserkers. Once we die, our souls will return to our homeland. If we die in humiliation, if those savages break through the formation, then our deaths will not be worth it. At the instant the rune in 4 sacred skies crumbled, the sect master of one of the sects in the land of Berserkers, a middle-aged man with a dark expression, stood in midair within Sky Mist Owl and stared at all the disciples in the 18 mountains. His gaze gradually softened, revealing a trace of reluctance. I don't want to die, but Sky Mist sect is about to be destroyed. When this rune collapses, we will all have to face death without exception. I hope that my death will be a worthy one. I hope that my death can make those savages in Death Region pay a terrible price. I hope that my death will allow the army of immortals to slaughter their way into the land of Berserkers to take revenge for us, and that fewer people will be sacrificed. I am not selfless, but at this moment, I hope that my death will be worth it. Who among you is willing to die a worthy death with me? The middle-aged man's voice was filled with passion. At the instant he said these words, he lifted his head swiftly and took a step towards the final rune above him, Sky Mist Owl's 4 Seasons Destruction rune. At the instant he moved forward, his physical body rapidly withered away. At the instant he got close to the rune, his physical body turned into a pile of dried-up bones and disappeared. However, his nascent divinity, which had all his blood, flesh, and cultivation base gathered together, flew out from the pile of dried-up bones and fused into the 4 Seasons Destruction rune with a bang. Sky Mist Owl's final rune is called 4 Seasons Destruction because as long as someone offers up their life in exchange for another, it will be incredibly difficult to break through. Sky Mist Owl only has dead souls. There are no living souls waiting for you Berserkers to arrive. I still have 4,800-something years of life left. Who among you will trade your life for mine? The voice of Sky Mist Owl's sect master in the land of Berserkers reverberated in the air and spread through the entire rune. Even the Berserkers outside stopped moving. Su Ming was right at the front. When he looked over, he could sense the immortals' determination to go mad, even if they had to die. Even if he hated this race, he had to admit that all races had aspects that were worthy of respect. I still have 700-something years of life left. Who among you will trade your life for mine? A person flew out from one of the 18 mountains in Sky Mist Owl and charged towards the 4 Seasons Destruction rune. I still have 100-something years of life left. I still have 2,200-something years of life left. I still have 400-something years of life left. I still have 600-something years of life left. Voices continued echoing in the 18 mountains in Sky Mist Owl. Suddenly, people charged towards the 4 Seasons Destruction rune. In the blink of an eye, these voices became more frequent, and in the end, they fused together to turn into Sky Mist Owl's shouts. I still have 500 years of life left, Wu La said softly, and with a single move, she fused into the rune. In silence, Tian Lan Yu lifted her head and took a step towards the rune. Behind her, Tian Lan Ming bit her bottom lip. In her anguish, she was just about to take another step forward when suddenly, the departing Tian Lan Yu turned her head around. Before Tian Lan Ming could react to what was going on, Tian Lan Yu lifted her right hand and swung it at her. A layer of white fog spread out, and Tian Lan Ming gradually closed her eyes in that fog and fell to the side. Live well, Tian Lan Yu said softly, then turned around and walked towards the rune in the sky. In the face of almost all the people in Sky Mist Owl offering up their lives, a piercing light erupted from the 4 Seasons Destruction rune. That light surrounded the entire area and appeared right before the Berserkers. The low roars and the words, "Trade your life for mine," represented the immortals' counterattack, and it also caused all the berserkers in the battle to fall silent for a moment. Yet it only lasted for a moment before all the berserkers took a step forward. A presence that could suppress everything swiftly reverberated in the air, and all the berserkers rushed into the light ring that was used to trade their lives for theirs. Su Ming did not move back. He took a step forward and stepped into the light ring at the same time as the berserkers. This was a fight to the death that was devoid of schemes, overt plots, and schemes. This was a madness of trading lives for lives. The immortals could do it, and the berserkers could do the same. As the life force of both sides fought against each other in the rune, booming sounds rang in the air, and once the sky mist Tao disciples gave up all their life force. Their bodies withered, but their nascent divinities exploded, using the power of their self-destruction to trade for an even greater price. It was the same for the berserkers. In this battle where there was no right or wrong and no reason, this madness of trading lives for theirs gradually came to an end as the number of people who died increased. The tens of thousands of immortals died and crumbled, until the sect master disappeared, until Wu La's soul scattered in anguish, until all the immortals gave up their lives for the sake of killing even more berserkers. This exchange of lives ended. When the final immortal in the rune died, the light from the Four Seasons destruction rune gradually faded away, eventually disappearing from the world. Su Ming stood in midair. Nearly 70,000 berserkers had died behind him. Of these people, half of them had died in the exchange of fates. The entire battlefield was filled with silence. They are warriors. Even if our hatred for them burns the heavens, they are warriors, and they are worthy of respect, Su Ming said slowly. His voice reverberated in the battlefield and fell into all the berserkers' ears. Sky Mistao was destroyed. However, in all races and all sects, there were those who dared to sacrifice themselves, and there would naturally be those who were cowardly and weak. At that moment, there were hundreds of people who had not given up their lives on the 18 mountains of Sky Mistao. Once the Four Seasons destruction rune disappeared and the entire world was filled with berserkers, these hundreds of people walked out with trembling bodies and knelt down towards the berserkers and Su Ming. We are willing to change our blood inheritance and worship the god of berserkers from now on. We will become berserkers. These hundreds of people knelt down and worshipped Su Ming while trembling, and their voices for the sake of survival rang out. Su Ming did not bother himself with these people. There would naturally be people who would enslave them and turn them into berserker subordinates. From then on, they would be slaves. Su Ming's gaze fell on a person who had fallen on one of the 18 mountains. He walked over in silence and arrived beside the unconscious Tian Lanming. He looked at her quietly, and a hint of nostalgia and complicated emotions appeared on his face. Su Ming closed his eyes, and when he opened them after a moment, he called out flatly, "Chi Lei Tian." Immediately, a long arc charged towards him from the sky behind him and landed behind him. Naturally, it was Chi Lei Tian. His heart was trembling slightly, but not a single hint of that emotion could be seen on his face. Instead, he was filled with zealous respect, and he knelt down on one knee before Su Ming. "I am Chi Lei Tian. I took half of your lightning crystal in the past," Su Ming said slowly. When he said these words, Chi Lei Tian's heart let out a loud thump, and an awkward and wry smile appeared on his face. "Today, I will give the ruins of Sky Mist Tao to your tribe. It will be the root for your tribe to grow stronger." Su Ming turned around and looked towards Chi Lei Tian. Chi Lei Tian was momentarily stunned. Then he instantly became excited and bowed towards Su Ming once again. "Thank you for your reward, God of Berserkers. You can stay here for now. As for the rest of the Berserkers, come with me and slaughter our way into Hidden Dragon's sect." Su Ming moved and walked toward the sky. The hundreds of thousands of Berserkers around him roared together and turned into long arcs that charged into the distance with Su Ming. "This woman is old friends with me. Stay here and do not harm her." Chi Lei Tian lifted his head and looked at the army of berserkers leaving into the distance in the sky, as well as Su Ming, who was standing right in front of them. The words Su Ming had sent to him before he left echoed in his ears. Remember to vote for me, to be continued. If you like this work, then please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 791. Hidden Dragon Sect. It was one of the 3 great immortal sects in the land of immortals. It occupied a large galaxy in the Immortals Galaxy, and its foundation was incredibly deep. It had plenty of cultivation planets, and its name was well known among the immortals. Hidden Dragon Sect in the land of Berserkers was just one of its branches, but even if it was just a branch, after years of operation, it had occupied some of the areas with the densest spiritual aura in Eastern Wastelands, just like Sky Mist Sect. The area that covered nearly 100,000 lease looked like a plain made of barren rocks. It was inconspicuous, and anyone could walk through it as if it was a place where no one could stop them. Even if they knew that this was where Hidden Dragon Sect was, they could not see it, touch it, or find even a single Hidden Dragon Sect disciple. No matter how they looked at it, this was just a normal plane. The 300,000-something berserkers occupied the entire sky in the sky. The murderous aura spreading out from their bodies caused the sky to darken and the land to be filled with a grim air. Su Ming's gaze fell on the ground. His expression was calm, and no one could tell whether he was happy or angry. Lord God of Berserkers, this is Hidden Dragon Sect. Standing beside, Su Ming was Manya from Berserker Fong tribe. A member of Sky Mist Sect who had voluntarily changed his blood inheritance spoke carefully. This person was a middle-aged man. His face was pale, and not only did his voice tremble, his heart was also filled with terror. He had personally witnessed Sky Mist Sect's destruction and saw almost all his fellow sect members die. Right then, as he faced the berserkers who had risen to power, his heart trembled in fear. It was especially so when Manya let out a sinister cackle right after he finished speaking. That cackle made the Sky Mist Sect disciple skin crawl. I once came to Hidden Dragon Sect with the elders of my sect many years ago. At that time, this place was not like this. I remember that there were plenty of floating palaces here, and they gave off a great presence that was unforgettable. The Sky Mist Sect disciple quickly said with his head lowered. Lord God of Berserkers, I come into contact with Hidden Dragon Sect many times. This sect is skilled in concealment, and the term Hidden Dragon is a testament to their sect master skills. Also, Hidden Dragon Sect has a lot of resources. It can be said that they are the richest sect among all the immortal sects in the land of Berserkers. Manya licked his lips and looked at the plain beneath him as he spoke to Su Ming. Su Ming averted his gaze from the plains and said languidly, Once we destroy this sect, I will give this place to your tribe. It will be a place for your tribe to grow stronger. When old Manya heard these words, an incredibly bright light instantly appeared in his eyes. As the strongest berserker in his tribe, and a berserker who had attained great completion in the Berserker Soul Realm, he had always longed for his tribe to become stronger, and since Hidden Dragon Sect had chosen this place, it was naturally incredibly suitable for his tribe to stay. He had been incredibly envious of Chile Tion for being able to occupy Sky Mist Dao with his people just now. When he heard Su Ming's words, he licked his lips and immediately started laughing. His yellowish and black teeth were revealed as he laughed, causing a ferocious air to appear on his face. Tian Shi, Wu Shuang, and Xue Sha stood behind Manya with calm expressions on their faces, but their hearts were filled with anticipation. They had already seen through Su Ming's intentions. Once he destroyed all the immortals in Eastern Wastelands, the places where the immortal sects were located would become the residences of the big tribes in Eastern Wastelands. Evil Spirit Sect will be given to Tian Chi. Evil Lust Sect will belong to Wu Xuan. As for Evil Immortal Sect, it will be Xue Sha's tribe's place of growth. Su Ming turned his head around and looked at the berserkers who had attained great completion in the Berserker Soul Realm. In fact, some of them had even taken a small step forward and were exuding the faint presence of life cultivation from their bodies. Su Ming had already learned of these old men's names when they had rushed over from all directions to pay their respects to him a year ago. At the same time, based on his previous understanding, he also understood that these people were the 5 strongest forces of power among the berserkers in Eastern Wastelands. "Thank you, God of Berserkers." Tianqi's spirits lifted, and he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed towards Su Ming. Shueisha and Wu Shuang also had smiles on their faces as they bowed towards Su Ming. The rise of the berserkers was one thing, but in truth, this rise could only appear when their tribes became stronger. That was why to them, this sort of reward was more practical than anything else. As for Great Leaf Immortal Sect, a freezing glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. Nangong Hen. When Su Ming spoke, a shadow immediately closed in on him and revealed itself before him. It was none other than the fated kin's Nangong Hen. There was respect on his face, but he did not wrap his fist in his palm to greet Su Ming. Instead, he knelt down on one knee and greeted Su Ming with the fated kin's greeting. Only he and the fated kin would not greet the god of berserkers, but Su Ming, their respected senior MO. Even if Su Ming was not the god of berserkers, the fated kin would still treat him with the same fervor. Su Ming looked at Nangong Hen and stated calmly, "The fated kin are my family. From now on, they will be my descendants in the land of berserkers. This Great Leaf Immortal Sect will be the fated kin's branch in Eastern Wastelands." There was no excitement on Nangong Hen's face. He only nodded. He did not thank Su Ming verbally, because the respect and fervor on his face surpassed the respect the other berserkers had towards Su Ming. It represented everything. After all, he did not worship the god of berserkers, only Su Ming. At the same time, Su Ming's words attracted the attention of Tianqi and the others. A thought appeared in their hearts, and they looked towards Su Ming. Shueisha blinked, and after a moment of hesitation, he asked in a low voice, "Lord God of Berserkers, it's only natural that we need to defend Eastern Wastelands. But Lord God of Berserkers, what did you mean just now? The continent of South Morning has already been shattered into islands, and all the islands in South Morning belong to the fated kin. The alliance of the Western region and the Northern province must also have immortals and other races and puppets supported by the immortals. Once we get rid of the immortals in Eastern Wastelands, are you willing to come with me to the other continents and develop your tribes?" Su Ming looked at Shueisha and the other two, then at Manya, whose eyes had turned slightly red. The 4 of them looked at each other, and their breathing quickened at that instant. They bowed towards Su Ming once again, but this time they did not wrap their fists in their palms. Instead, they knelt down on one knee, just like Nangong Hen had done. "We are willing to follow the god of berserkers and fight against the alliance of the Western region. We will sweep through the Northern province and kill all the outsiders so that we can return our land to the berserkers. We will do whatever it takes for the berserkers to rise to power." Su Ming did not speak. Instead, he looked at the horizon in the distance. That was the west, in the direction of the alliance of the Western region. "My soul is in the land of berserkers. The only thing I can do is to unite the berserkers and make them stronger. Only by doing so can I bring the berserkers out of Endeth region and go to the immortals' world to see the colors of autumn fill the land of the immortals." Su Ming mumbled in a voice that only he could hear. He was lonely, incomplete, lonely, and lost. His eyes would always shine with a light that was intersecting with both confusion and clarity. He did not know where his future lay. He only knew that he needed to see the red of autumn to move from winter to spring. "I'm almost not me anymore, but I don't even know what sort of person I am." Su Ming sucked in a deep breath. Everything in his eyes was replaced by a freezing chill. At the instant he looked at the ground, he lifted his foot and took a step towards it. At the instant his foot landed, the power at the peak of the initial stage of life matrix erupted from Su Ming's body with a bang. This power was the strongest power in the land of berserkers at that moment, and it was an invincible peak in the land of berserkers. There was no one in the land of berserkers who could surpass this level of cultivation at that moment. Even if there was someone who could, they would definitely be suppressed, or perhaps they were not human existences who could surpass Su Ming's level of cultivation. However, when it came to humans, Su Ming was invincible. As his foot landed, Su Ming swung his right hand in the direction of the sky. At the instant he did so, a freezing cold air filled the world. It grew thicker with each passing moment, and in an instant, it turned into a layer of snow that flew in the air. Endless snowflakes spread out in all directions with Su Ming as the center. In the blink of an eye, the circular area of several hundreds of thousands of lis turned into midwinter. The endless snowflakes exuded a chill that could freeze all manner of living things. They also exuded a presence that would make people's hearts tremble in fear. Each of the snowflakes exuded a bleak, murderous aura that would not lose to that of a berserker in the berserker soul realm. This was the powerful power that came from Su Ming once he stepped into the initial stage of life matrix and reached the peak of the initial stage. It far surpassed those who had attained great completion in the berserker soul realm, and it was impossible for them to compare to him. He was at the peak of invincibility. Those snowflakes might have seemed like snow, but in truth, they were not snow. They were Su Ming's life. They were his life of death. They were formed by all the aura of death in his body, and once they fused with his life matrix, they would erupt forth with a unique divine ability belonging to those who cultivated life matrix. This sort of divine ability was different for each person. All the people who stepped into this realm would have their life matrices different, and their epiphanies would be different. There would not be a single type of divine ability that was completely similar to each other. This was the first time Su Ming released the power of his life matrix without holding anything back and brought forth a flower of snow that had bloomed in eastern wastelands. As Su Ming's power spread out, as the freezing wind moaned and snow fell from the sky, Xue Sha and the others sucked in a sharp breath and looked toward Su Ming. During that instant, they truly came to know Su Ming's strength and the awe-inspiring might of the god of berserkers. At that moment, the shocking battle between Su Ming and the immortals a year ago also appeared in their minds. These scenes turned into an invisible seed that was branded into their hearts. This seed was known as reverence. This reverence would accompany them for the rest of their lives. Su Ming's expression was calm. He looked at the snow around him, then pushed his right hand down lightly on the ground beneath him. At the instant he did so, all the snow in a circular area of 100,000 something lis froze for an instant, then charged towards the spot where Su Ming's right hand was pressing down on the ground through the air. In the span of a breath, booming sounds that shook the sky and earth rang out madly from the ground. The endless amount of snow crashed into the ground at the same time, and it was as if a picture had been torn apart. Once it was lifted up, the ground looked as if all illusions had been torn apart, revealing hidden dragon sect that was hidden in the illusion. Many luxurious palaces floated in the air. Hidden dragon sect disciples stood on top of those palaces, their faces pale and filled with shock. "Kill them. Don't leave a single one alive," Su Ming said flatly. "To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 792. The sky turned a faint shade of red. That shade of red was like that of autumn, causing all those who saw it to feel desolate. The ground was covered in a thick layer of blood. When spread out, a bloody stench would either make all those who smelled it feel nauseous or incredibly excited. This was not hell, but more like hell. However, the spring water had turned into blood. Hidden Dragon Sect was destroyed in the land of berserkers. Besides the 1,000-something people who knelt down on the ground, trembling in submission, and chose to change their blood inheritance so that they could survive, all the other people in the sect died. They died wretched deaths. They did not have much power to fight back. Under the onslaught of the 400,000 berserkers, no one could survive, especially since this place would become Man Yu's tribe's residence in the future. That was why, as a precaution, Manya had his tribe seal off the area tightly to ensure that no hidden dragon sect disciple could escape. Su Ming did not take action in this massacre. He stood quietly in midair and watched the bloody scene with a cold gaze. The shrill screams of pain reached his ears, along with the endless malicious curses before they died. When Su Ming saw and heard all of this, the confusion and clarity in his eyes intersected with each other. He stood still and did not move. Nan Gonghen protected Su Ming quietly. The fated kin were scattered around Su Ming. If any hidden dragon sect member rushed over, they would immediately turn into the ice and snow that represented death. Everyone will eventually die. Moving from life to death is like moving from spring to winter. But the color of autumn is still too faint, Su Ming mumbled softly. When night fell and the moon hung high in the sky, the aura of death surged into the sky from Hidden Dragon Sect. It spread out in the air, and an innumerable amount of halls and towers crumbled in the massacre. From then on, Hidden Dragon Sect no longer existed in this place. Instead, it was the place where Manya and his tribe lived. A large amount of Hidden Dragon Sect's resources were dug out. An innumerable amount of seals were forcefully broken by Manya and the other four. Cave abodes were opened, and a huge amount of resources that could make almost everyone's breathing quicken were revealed before Su Ming. There's a large amount of spirit stones, an innumerable amount of medicinal cores, a large amount of ancient scrolls, and a large amount of resources needed to create enchanted vessels. All of these things showed just how great Hidden Dragon Sect's wealth and foundation were. Even Sky Mist Sect might be as famous as Hidden Dragon Sect in the Immortals Galaxy, but when the branch sect was destroyed and searched, they only managed to obtain a third of what Hidden Dragon Sect had. Su Ming did not take away too many of these items. Most of them were given to the big tribes in Eastern Wastelands as an important resource for them to strengthen themselves. 7 days later, Evil Spirit Sect managed to last for half a day under the onslaught of the Berserkers' army. All the sect's runes were broken, and from then on, the sect became a thing of the past in the land of Berserkers. Other than a limited number of people and a few hundred who had chosen to submit in order to survive, the rest were all dead. Blood flowed down Evil Spirit Mountain and flowed all the way down to the foot of the mountain. Shrill screams of pain and booming sounds reverberated in the air as they fought. Shendong did not die, and the girl who had been controlled by Su Ming with the art of a doll also did not die in the battle. Instead, she was asked to leave by the Berserkers. This was Su Ming's order. Besides her, the entire Evil Spirit Sect was destroyed, and it turned into the new location for Old Tianqi's sect. Another 5 days passed. When the army of hundreds of thousands of Berserkers closed in on Evil Lust Sect, they chose to self-destruct the runes in their sect. This sort of self-destruction caused the world within 100,000 Lys to descend into madness. Perhaps there were quite a number of Evil Lust Sect members who did not want to do this, but in the end, they could not stop this sort of death. As a loud bang reverberated through the entire Eastern Wastelands, Evil Lust Sect, along with the land where the sect was located, were reduced to ashes. A large number of Berserkers also died. This sort of death surpassed what they had suffered in Sky Mist Sect, but it only stimulated the Berserkers' blood to descend into madness. With this madness, the army of Berserkers charged towards Evil Immortal Sect. When the runes on the sect's gate finally crumbled and the army of Berserkers were about to kill all the people from Evil Immortal Sect, an incredibly dramatic scene appeared. The people from Evil Immortal Sect split up from within. At the same time the runes shattered, half of the people from Evil Immortal Sect died. The remaining thousands of people knelt down and worshipped the incoming Berserkers. They were willing to change their blood inheritance and become slaves, choosing to submit to them. At that moment, all the immortal sects in Eastern Wastelands were destroyed, and only one was left, Great Leaf Immortal Sect. As for the destroyed sects, they turned into the tribes belonging to the big tribes of Eastern Wastelands who had followed Su Ming, Xuesha, Tianqi, and the others. There were also the immortal sects who had changed their blood inheritance in the past, and became affiliated with the immortals, who were half berserkers and half immortals. These people were once berserkers, but now they had become an anomaly. For the first time, the big tribes and the army of berserkers struggled to deal with these people. Some of them believed that they could survive. After all, many of these people were originally from their own tribes, and some of them were even their relatives. However, there were even more berserkers who hated them. They believed that these people who had betrayed the berserkers must use blood to wash away the humiliation they had suffered. This struggle and the different voices could not be reconciled. In the end, Su Ming made a decision regarding this matter. There were quite a lot of them who had once betrayed the berserkers, and they had to be punished. This punishment was for them to be the vanguard of the army that would sweep through the alliance of the Western region and the outsiders in Northern Province. If they killed a sufficient number of outsiders, they would use their war achievements to exchange for the right to return to the land of berserkers. If they did not die, then they would still be berserkers and could worship the god of berserkers once again. Not all the berserkers who had changed their blood inheritance chose to accept this decision, but those who did not became a part of the will of autumn in the world. Under this brutal slaughter, besides a certain region in eastern wastelands, all the other tribes in the continent returned to the berserkers once again. A gathering to cross the Dead Sea and head to the alliance of the western region and the northern province was carried out by the big tribes. Crossing the Dead Sea, especially with hundreds of thousands or even millions of people, was something that had never happened since the land of berserkers had been divided into 5 parts. This sort of grand event attracted all the berserkers' enthusiasm. Besides Su Ming and a limited number of people, most of the berserkers would not be able to fly. That was why they needed an endless amount of ships that could cross the Dead Sea. As the entire eastern wastelands made preparations, Su Ming did not bring any berserkers with him. He only brought his fated kin to the mountain gate of Great Leaf Immortal Sect. Great Leaf Immortal Sect was currently the only immortal land in eastern wastelands. Su Ming would not let the berserkers attack this place. He would destroy Great Leaf Immortal Sect alone, because this sect belonged to Dtion. Great Leaf Immortal Sect's mountain gate was a mountain that towered into the clouds. That mountain looked like a gigantic sword that stood erect on the ground. It was a terrifying sight to behold, and compared to it, the people were like ants. Perhaps Great Leaf Immortal Sect did not look like this in the past, but right then, the sect before Su Ming was a mountain and a sword that wanted to charge into the sky. Waves of sword aura spread out and filled an area of 10,000 lis around Great Leaf Immortal Sect. All the living beings who stepped into that area would have to endure the slaughter from that sword aura. Respected Senior Mo, let the fated kin come with us. Nan Gonghen stood beside Su Ming, and behind him were hundreds of fated kin. All of these people had zealous looks on their faces as they looked at Su Ming, waiting for his orders. Su Ming shook his head. He looked at the hundreds of fated kin, and a smile appeared on his face. He turned around and took a step towards the area of 10,000 lis. At the instant his foot landed, sword aura surged into the sky within the area of 10,000 lis around Great Leaf Immortal Sect. As piercing whistling sounds reverberated in the air, hundreds of sword auras appeared out of nowhere and charged towards Su Ming. Booming sounds reverberated in the air the instant Su Ming took his third step. The hundreds of sword auras all charged towards him, but they could not stop him in the slightest. When they were 100 feet away from him, they looked as if they had run into a barrier that prevented them from moving forward, and all of them crumbled. A 9-colored screen of light manifested 100 feet away from Su Ming. That screen of light was formed by a square seal floating above Su Ming's head at that moment. That seal was naturally Su Ming's enchanted treasure, the 5-direction seal. As Su Ming's level of cultivation increased, he had refined the 5-direction seal in his body during the year he was in Eastern Wastelands Tower. At that moment, he could already control it slightly, and he could even spread out the 9-colored screen of light. Under the hundreds of fated kin's gazes, they saw their respected senior Mo, Su Ming, walking into the distance. As he walked further into the distance, and got closer to Great Leaf Immortal Sex Mountain. The sword auras that came charging towards him from the hundreds had already increased to thousands. The thousands of sword auras surrounded the world and charged towards Su Ming with a bleak, murderous aura, but not a single one of them managed to rush into the nine-colored screen of light. When Su Ming executed an extreme speed and shot up from the ground like a long arc, he flew towards Great Leaf Immortal Sex Mountain. The thousands of sword auras erupted with a bang and turned into tens of thousands of sword auras that charged towards Su Ming from all directions. Behind those tens of thousands of sword auras, there were still tens of thousands of them. It was as if there was no end to them. As booming sounds surged into the sky, Su Ming's body could no longer be seen clearly. He was hidden within the endless amount of sword auras. When Su Ming was less than 1,000 leagues away from the mountain belonging to Great Leaf Immortal Sect, a deafening roar came from the entire region. As it rumbled, 9 gigantic cracks suddenly tore open on the ground, and 9 astonishing waves of sword aura shot out with a bang. Those 9 waves of sword aura were incredibly powerful, and once they appeared, they turned into swords. At the instant they appeared, they charged towards Su Ming. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of sword auras appeared out of nowhere in the world around him. They surrounded the 9 sword auras that had gained physical form and charged towards Su Ming. Su Ming's expression was indifferent. At the instant the sword auras closed in on him, he lifted his right hand and seized the air. A killing sword shining with golden light appeared in his hand. As he held the sword, a fierce glare appeared in Su Ming's eyes. "Is a sword still a sword if I don't hold it in my hand?" he asked flatly, and the killing sword in his hand thrust forward. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 793. This week, I recommend the top 3, and next week it will explode. Recommend, I want to recommend. Please persevere, please vote. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 794. The way to use the sword in the legacy Su Ming obtained from Hong Luo was clearly different from the way the immortals executed the flying sword. This way of using the sword was even more ancient and clumsy. It could not compare to the agility of the flying sword, which was why Hong Luo had not researched it in depth after he had obtained it by chance. However, Su Ming was very interested in this way of using the sword. This ancient way of using the sword was based on using the user's hand to hold the sword. Only when the sword was in the user's hand was the sword user's true weapon. With the killing sword shining with golden light in his hand, Su Ming casually thrust forward, and the instant the sword sliced through the air and moved forward, a great suction force erupted from the sword. This was not the sword's own power. Instead, Su Ming's thrust seemed to have faintly conformed to some sort of law in the world, triggering some strange changes, causing the place where the sword passed through to become the center of the area, causing all existences, including divine sense and presence, to be sucked back by that one thrust. The hundreds of thousands of sword auras in the area started distorting at that instant and changed their direction at the same time. They were sucked towards the sword, as if the line the sword cut through had turned into a black hole that could devour everything. However, the 9 sword auras that had nearly gained corporeal form that flew out from the crack in the ground started dispersing slightly. Once they started changing between an illusion and corporeal form, they let out piercing sword whistles and charged towards Su Ming without changing their direction. In the span of a breath, they were less than 100 feet away from him. The 9 swords closed in together, and the powerful pressure spreading out from them made it seem as if they could destroy everything. Once he thrust forward, Su Ming's expression remained calm. He relaxed his grip on the killing sword slightly, but he did not clench it tightly. Instead, at the instant the 9 swords closed in on him, he shook his wrist, and with his wrist as the axis, he swung the killing sword horizontally from left to right, from top to bottom, then from left to right before him. When anyone looked over, they saw that as the sword in Su Ming's hand rotated horizontally before him, a sword circle formed by an endless amount of sword afterimages manifested as Su Ming swung the sword. It looked like a circle made of swords, but when Su Ming looked at it again, he found that it was the sword art of the sword rune. It looked as if it had turned into a sword shield that protected the area before Su Ming, and it crashed into the incoming 9 flying swords. The sounds of swords clashing against each other rose into the air at that instant, eventually turning into a booming sound. As it spread out, the 9 swords that had gained physical form instantly crumbled and tumbled backwards, turning into smoke that scattered away. Su Ming stood where he was with an indifferent look on his face. The sword in his hand drew a beautiful arc in the air, and it moved diagonally to the bottom left of his body. A freezing glare shone in his eyes, and a murderous aura appeared within them. The appearance of that murderous aura and Su Ming placing the sword diagonally to the bottom left of his body caused Su Ming to feel as if he was accumulating power. It was like the calm before the eruption of a storm, like the low rumble before the eruption of a volcano, like an ancient ferocious beast that was about to devour the heavens and earth. During that instant, the operations of the world around him started showing signs of coming to a halt. An indescribable pressure enveloped the area without a single sound, and the source of all of this was Su Ming's action of placing the sword diagonally to the bottom. There are 13 styles in the sword, and I have only understood 4 of them. They are bounce, thrust, cloud, and slice, but it's enough to break this rune. At the instant Su Ming said those words flatly, he swung the sword diagonally to the bottom left of his body towards the top right. A clear sword mark that ran from the bottom left of his body to the top right appeared with a bang in the world. This was a slice. With the sharpness of the sword, he could slice through all the obstacles that stood in his way. At the instant he swung the sword, the world roared. It contained some sort of change in the laws in the world, and at the instant he swung the sword, an excited sword whistle came from within the killing sword. There was a wave of agitation and excitement within that whistle, and it was the sword's complete acknowledgement, because this was the most correct way for a sword to bring forth a power that could shake the sky and earth. If it was a flying sword that had no one holding it, then it would be impossible for it to execute this slice. Besides thrusting and slashing, it would not be able to execute any other moves. The killing sword had a spirit. It had been suppressed by Su Ming previously and had been forced to submit to him, but it was clear that this submission had resulted in a backlash. Yet at that moment, as the sword whistle rang in the air, the killing sword's spirit truly acknowledged Su Ming, because it could sense that when it was held in Su Ming's hand, the sword had erupted with its complete power, and it had even surpassed its own power when it executed those 3 actions. This power made it tremble and excited. This power made it feel as if it was being cleansed, as if it had gained an epiphany that this was how it should shine as a sword. The world roared. As Su Ming swung the sword, a sword mark that was slanted diagonally tore through the air before him. That tear charged forward with a bang, and wherever it went, the world would be torn apart. The air would shatter, and the crack grew larger. Once it swept through 1,000 leagues, it landed on Great Leaf Immortal Sex Mountain. An even stronger bang rang in the air, and Su Ming's slash shot through the mountain. It shot through the sword-shaped mountain and charged behind it. As it continued spreading out, it eventually turned into a crack that was several tens of thousands of feet long. It shot through the sword rune that surrounded Great Leaf Immortal Sect and blasted open a gigantic gap. Once that gap appeared, Great Leaf Immortal Sect's mountain protection rune around Su Ming crumbled. The rune shattered and turned into an endless amount of sword aura shards that tumbled backwards in all directions. They stirred up a violent gust of wind that swept through the 9 heavens and let out violent booms that shook the entire area. At the same time, the moment the Great Leaf Immortal Sect's sword formation collapsed, the sword-shaped mountain of Great Leaf Immortal Sect trembled. From the center of the mountain slowly tilted under the rumbling. Half of the mountain fell to the left, and landed on the ground, causing the ground to tremble and a loud bang that surged into the sky. Dust tumbled about and spread out in all directions. Su Ming's hair and robes fluttered in the wind that was stirred up when the mountain fell, but not a single hint of change could be detected on his face. With the killing sword in his hand, he looked towards the mountain coldly. At that moment, half of Great Leaf Immortal Sect's mountain had been cut off. That cut was incredibly smooth, and that was the spot where Su Ming's sword mark had pierced through the mountain. The sword mountain had been cut off. The killing sword in Su Ming's hand trembled and let out excited cries. The killing intent spreading out from the tip of the sword made it seem as if it was thirsting for blood, thirsting to use this method of using the sword to drink a lifetime's worth of blood. The sword is the main killing weapon. Su Ming lifted his head and looked at the broken mountain of Great Leaf Immortal Sect, then walked forward slowly. On this day, he would destroy an entire sect alone and save his second senior brother who was in Great Leaf Immortal Sect. Behind Su Ming, the fated kin were looking at their respected senior MO with excited expressions. The power of that one sword strike just now had shaken the sky and earth, and it was enough to make all the people who had witnessed it feel their hearts tremble. Su Ming's footsteps might have seemed slow, but in truth, with each step he took, his body would become a little illusory. When his figure became clear, he would already be 1,000 feet away. It would be fine if anyone looked at his back, and they would not feel too much discomfort, but if anyone looked at him from the front, then they would immediately feel dizzy. Because they could clearly see that he was tens of thousands of feet away, but in the blink of an eye, as if their eyes were deceiving them, Su Ming's body would suddenly turn illusory and then clear in the blink of an eye, immediately causing the many immortals from Great Leaf Immortal Sect who were staring at Su Ming to feel dizzy. Almost at the moment that feeling of dizziness appeared, Su Ming was already standing under the broken mountain of Great Leaf Immortal Sect. He lifted his head and looked at the broken mountain, then let out a deep breath. As Su Ming breathed, snow immediately fell from the sky above Great Leaf Immortal Sect. Each of those snowflakes exuded an endless amount of freezing air, and in the blink of an eye, a circular area of 10,000 lis was covered in snow. The snowflakes were densely packed, and as they fell on the ground, they looked like a gigantic seal from the distance that trapped Great Leaf Immortal Sect within. This was Su Ming's art of life cultivation, midwinter's chill. With this art, he sealed up the entire area, causing all the immortals in Great Leaf Immortal Sect to be unable to escape, turning this place into a prison. Today I, Su Ming, have come to destroy Great Leaf Immortal Sect, Su Ming said slowly. As his voice reverberated in the air, an endless amount of Su Ming's voice also seemed to be echoing faintly from the endless snowflakes around him. Once these voices fused together, they turned into a roar that sounded like the heavens themselves, causing the broken mountain of Great Leaf Immortal Sect to tremble. At the same time he said these words, Su Ming lifted his foot and walked up the stairs leading to Great Leaf Immortal Sect's mountain. At the instant his foot landed, an endless amount of sword aura erupted from Great Leaf Immortal Sect with a bang, and 2,000 long arcs flew out together with it. Within those 2,000 long arcs were 2,000 Great Leaf Immortal Sect disciples. Their eyes were bloodshot, and as they charged forward, they charged towards Su Ming along with the sword aura. As roars reverberated in the air behind them, more Great Leaf Immortal Sect disciples flew out and rushed towards Su Ming. The sword in Su Ming's hand was howling, desiring to be dyed red by blood. It caused this sword that was in charge of killing to tremble violently, and that howl seemed to be begging Su Ming to let it kill to its heart's content. Su Ming looked at the thousands of people closing in on him quietly, and the chill in his eyes became even colder. He lifted his foot and took another step forward. As he did so, the stairs behind him instantly shattered and turned into ashes. He did not say anything unnecessary. The moment he took that step, the thousands of Great Leaf Immortal Sect disciples had already closed in on him. Su Ming swung the sword in his hand forward, and a head flew into the air, bringing with it a mouthful of blood that dyed the tip of the sword red. The sword sparkled and spread outwards, and immediately several heads flew into the air once again. When the blood covered Su Ming and the immortal's vision, Su Ming took his third step, fourth step, fifth step. He walked up calmly. There were countless immortals and sword aura rumbling by his side. The sword in his hand did not stop moving. As the sword spirit let out excited and bloodthirsty howls, the heads fell to the ground and tumbled down the mountain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 795. Su Ming did not know just how many people he had killed. He took 300 steps forward, and an endless amount of sword aura came charging towards him with loud, booming sounds. But as he swung the killing sword in his hand, those sword auras shattered one by one. At the same time, more heads flew into the sky with blood and shrill screams of pain. Su Ming's body was dyed in blood. It was the blood of a great leaf, immortal sect disciple. The killing sword in his hand was red, and the entire great leaf, immortal sect's mountain had turned red. The 300 steps behind Su Ming had all shattered, as if they symbolized his will and determination. Wherever he went, all the living beings would shatter, just like the stones on the steps. Blood flowed down the mountain, and a thick stench of blood filled the area. Even the snow in the area looked as if it was about to be dyed red at that moment. Su Ming walked forward calmly and swung the tip of his sword. A young man who looked to be less than 20 years of age had his head separated from his body. Confusion appeared in his eyes, and anguish appeared on his face before he fell to the ground. There is no enmity between us, but you should not be a member of Great Leaf Immortal Sect, Su Ming said softly. He seized the air by his side with his left hand, and immediately, a person who had cast a divine ability and turned into a colorful phoenix to charge towards him had his left hand shot through that divine ability and seized that person's neck. It was a woman, a beautiful woman, but Su Ming did not show a hint of pity for her. The chill in his left hand seeped into the woman's body, causing her neck to shatter as she trembled in despair. A destructive power surged into her body and disintegrated her nascent divinity. Su Ming let go and took a step forward. There was no right or wrong, no good or evil. There were only choices made based on different standpoints. Great Leaf Immortal Sect was Tion's sect, and this decided the sect's fate. In Su Ming's mind, there was no such thing as having a perpetrator for every wrong. There was only the aloofness of destroying all those who provoked him. His thoughts were extreme, bigoted, and merciless towards his enemies. It did not matter whether it was Hidden Dragon Sect, Sky Mist Sect, or the three evil sects. Su Ming had practically not done much in the destruction of these sections. Most of them were slaughtered madly by the berserkers. Only Great Leaf Immortal Sect did Su Ming not bring a single berserker with him. Even the fated kin were ordered to wait outside. Because of Su Ming's hatred towards Great Leaf Immortal Sect, even if he did not kill even one of them, he would still regret it. Because he hated one person, he would hate all the people in that person's bloodline and all the sections. This might not be right, but in Su Ming's memories, before he came to Death region, he had heard his little sister's voice in the endless darkness. He had also sensed all the people surrounding him and his little sister and devouring a certain presence in their bodies, causing his little sister to become increasingly weaker. All of this had already made him paranoid. I helped the berserkers because my soul is here. It's because of my master and my senior brothers. They are berserkers, and it's because of the beautiful things in my memories. Even if those beautiful things are fake, they're the memories I cherish the most in my life. That mountain, those people, and the traditions, customs, and everything else belongs to the berserkers. That's why I'll help the berserkers. That's why even if I don't think of myself as the god of berserkers, I can still help the berserkers rise to power for them. Nostalgia appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He swung the sword in his hand, and took a few steps forward once again. At that moment, there were already thousands of heads behind him, but this slaughter had not ended. Because he cherished his memories, and because the people of the Ninth Summit were berserkers, Su Ming could give his all for the berserkers. This was his personality. Similarly, the other side of this extreme personality was Su Ming's killing spree. Because he hated one person, he could hate that person's entire family and sect. If he wanted to kill them, he would not leave even a single blade of grass behind. You shouldn't have entered Great Leaf, immortal sect. Su Ming shook his head. He swung the blood-red sword in his hand horizontally, and with a single move, he stepped onto the top of the mountain that was half of Great Leaf, immortal sect's mountain. With one swing of the blood-red sword, dozens of heads flew into the air. Blood filled the air and dyed all the snow in the area red. Su Ming. At the instant Su Ming stepped onto the half of the mountain, an enraged roar came from before him. That voice came from Bustling. Bustling held the sword in his hand. His body was trembling, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked at Su Ming, and a complicated look as well as hatred appeared in his eyes. Qinshin stood quietly by his side, and there was a dazed and gloomy look on her face. Must you kill us all? Must you destroy the entire Great Leaf, immortal sect? Bustling glared at Su Ming and roared loudly. Su Ming lifted his foot and walked up the final step. When he stood on the half of the mountain, a crack appeared on the final step behind him, but it did not shatter. This was the first step that had not completely shattered after Su Ming walked down it. If that's the case, then kill us so that we won't be filled with grief and indignation when we see our fellow sect members die. Attack! Bustling, will definitely not fight back. Attack! Bustling threw away the sword in his hand, and as he roared, tears fell from the corners of his eyes. Su Ming fell silent. The killing sword in his hand let out killing intent on its own. It contained a hint of bloodthirsty spirit, and it looked at the two people before it with a cold gaze. If Su Ming had not stopped moving, it would have definitely rushed out and killed these two people so that it could use their blood to make itself even more brilliant. On this day, it had been dyed in blood that it had not seen for a long time. This caused its acknowledgement towards Su Ming to reach its peak in the midst of its excitement. You no longer care about the past. You no longer care about everything in Dark Mountain. Then come and kill me. Kill Qinshin, who has liked you since you were young. Kill us. You won't need too much time. Kill us and cut off our longing for you. Bustling roared loudly, and more tears fell from his eyes. Do you still remember when I taught you how to use an arrow? Do you still remember how we fought together when Dark Mountain was surrounded by Black Mountain tribe? Are you still the same you from Dark Mountain? Are you worthy of the Elder? Are you worthy of the tribe members of Dark Mountain tribe? Come on, kill me. Bustling's words caused a sharp pain to appear in Su Ming's heart in the midst of his silence. This pain was akin to a poison that would only grow stronger the more precious a memory was. It was a pain that wanted to tear his heart and soul apart. At the instant he felt that pain and looked towards Bustling slowly, Qinshin suddenly lifted her head. The dull look in her eyes was replaced by a complicated look. As tears fell from her eyes, she looked as if she had made her decision and cried out urgently to Su Ming. Su Ming, leave. Yet before she could finish speaking, Bustling turned around swiftly and slapped Qinshin. Qinshin tumbled backwards and fell to the ground. Blood trickled out of the corners of her mouth. Almost at the instant Qinshin gave the warning, a sword suddenly appeared from the air behind Su Ming at the speed of lightning. Taking advantage of the instant Su Ming was hurt by Bustling's words, it pierced through his heart from the back. There was also a hint of dark blue flame at the tip of the sword. That was a poisonous flame that could burn souls. As long as that sword stabbed into a person's body, that person's soul would be burned. That sword seemed to have been waiting for a long time, waiting for the instant Bustling caused Su Ming's heart to tremble. Then it would activate this trap that was clearly set up to kill Su Ming. With a thud, Su Ming's chest was covered in blood. The sword that had appeared behind him had pierced through his chest, revealing a small part of the blade. Blood flowed down the tip of the sword and fell on the ground, falling on the snow on the ground. Drop by drop, drop by drop. Su Ming, you shouldn't have come to Great Leaf Immortal Sect. An old voice came from behind Su Ming. He was familiar with that voice. It belonged to Biling's father, the head of the guards of Dark Mountain. Almost at the instant the head of the guard sword pierced through Su Ming's body and his words echoed in the air. Su Ming lowered his head to look at the tip of the sword. A ferocious look immediately appeared on Biling's face, and as he charged forward, he instantly appeared in front of Su Ming. When he lifted his right hand, a black dagger appeared in his hand, and he stabbed the center of Su Ming's brows. Die, Su Ming! The dagger sank into the center of Su Ming's brows. At the same time, chants of incantations suddenly came from the sky. As they reverberated in the air, people swiftly appeared, and there were the near 10,000 Great Leaf Immortal Sect disciples. They floated in midair and surrounded an area of 1,000 leagues. With Great Leaf Immortal Sect's mountain as the center, they formed a gigantic rune. That rune started circulating slowly as the near 10,000 people moved forward. As it did so, a gigantic sealing power descended on the ground with a bang. And as that sealing power spread out, the near 10,000 people lifted the swords in their hands and swung them swiftly towards Su Ming, who was underneath them. As the rune continued circulating and booming sounds surged into the sky, the near 10,000 swords turned into a huge sword of 1,000 feet. That sword exuded an ancient and simple air, and it instantly charged towards Su Ming from the sky. You're not Dark Mountain's Bei Ling. Su Ming did not bother himself with the huge sword descending from the sky. He looked at Biling, who had a ferocious expression on his face, and spoke flatly. Biling's expression suddenly changed drastically, and he widened his eyes. He saw the dagger that had pierced the center of Su Ming's brows rapidly freezing over. In an instant, it turned into ice, and, as the freezing air spread out, the instant he was about to loosen his grip, it covered his arm and swiftly filled his entire body, freezing Biling's body and his nascent divinity, turning him into an ice sculpture before Su Ming. You're not Dark Mountain's head of the guards either. When Su Ming said those words softly, the tip of the sword in his chest turned into ice. The head of the guards behind him let out a low growl in shock and hastily retreated, but before he could even take 3 steps back, he was sealed in ice, just like his son, and turned into an ice sculpture. This was Su Ming's divine ability in life cultivation. He was midwinter, and his life matrix was winter. He could summon the snow of midwinter, and he could also freeze everything. Unless his opponent's level of cultivation was higher than his, it was impossible for him to do anything before life cultivation. Cracking sounds reverberated in the air. The ice statue that was Biling still retained its ferocious appearance as it shattered into pieces. The ice statue that was his father also shattered into pieces as the cracking sounds echoed in the air. The dagger at the center of Su Ming's brow shattered, and the tip of the sword in front of his chest also shattered. He stood there, still not bothering himself with the sword descending from the sky. Instead, he looked at Qinshin, who had blood trickling down the corners of her lips. "Why did you warn me?" Su Ming asked softly. "Today's votes are the least this month. Where did all the recommendation votes go?" To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 796. A red snowflake fell on Qinshin's face. It did not melt, but there was a hint of cold in it. It was just like Su Ming's words. There was an unfamiliar presence in the gentleness of his words, and they fell into Qinshin's ears and entered her heart. There was still blood at the corners of Qinshin's mouth. The red of that blood was the same as the color of the snowflake on her face, causing others to be unable to tell whether it was blood or snow. Perhaps there is a reason why the word snow was similar to blood in terms of rhythm. There is no why. If there is, then you're Su Ming. You are the Su Ming who grew up with me. Qinshin wiped off the blood at the corners of her mouth and looked at Su Ming. The complicated look on her face disappeared, replaced by a gentle smile. Su Ming was silent. When he lifted his right hand, the killing sword in his hand shuddered in excitement. He swung at the sky, and blood-red light shone. It was as if a blood-red bolt of lightning had been born out of nowhere in the world. It charged towards the sword, descending from midair with a howl. A sound shook the area and formed a circular wave of impact. It instantly rose into the air above Su Ming, and the descending sword was torn to shreds. The wave of air that was stirred up formed a ring, as if it wanted to draw a boundary between the sky and earth. "Thank you," Su Ming said softly. Su Ming, everything in Dark Mountain was an illusion, but there was also reality. Lei Chun was real, and so was the Elder, and Bai Ling, she also had a real side to her. Qinshin looked at Su Ming. She could feel that if a person's past was fake, then that feeling of unreality would come crashing down like a tidal wave and drown the person. It would make the person question everything, and they might not even know what was real. You killed Bai Ling. The prodigies from the other sects and clans who had fused with Dark Mountain and grew up with you must have died. But Su Ming, what they lost was just a divine clone. What happened in Dark Mountain is something that happened a long, long time ago. In the past, once we woke up from that cycle of life and death, we obtained quite a lot of serendipities and epiphanies, and we became the true prodigies of our respective sects and clans. Right now, the ones you killed in the land of berserkers were divine clones that had to exist to maintain your cycles of life and death. They are in the immortal sects and clans, and they did not die. Qinshin looked at Su Ming and told him the truth. "Then what about you?" Su Ming asked flatly. "I'm also a part of my soul. I can feel the consciousness of the original body. The moment I saw you, I could feel my own complexity and nostalgia." Chun Xen shook her head bitterly. "I've been practicing cultivation since I was young, and over the years, the most colorful memories in my life are the things that happened when I was in Dark Mountain. I truly hope that I can never wake up in that cycle of reincarnation. I want to stay in Dark Mountain forever." Qinshin's face was pale. In the midst of her anguish, she mumbled, as if she was not talking to Su Ming, but was mumbling to herself, something she had suppressed for a long time. As Qinshin mumbled under her breath, the near 10,000 Great Leaf immortal sect disciples in the sky swiftly changed their positions. As they intersected with each other, they gave others the feeling that the sword rune in the sky had changed once again. A sword aura that was much stronger than before gathered together with a bang and charged towards Su Ming in the sky. "Su Ming, some of us chose to forget about you, but there are still some who still remember you. They remember Dark Mountain, and they remember growing up together in the cycle of life and death. Dark Mountain has already become a thing of the past, but it is in your heart, and it is also in our hearts." Qinshin lifted her right hand. At the instant she said these words, more blood trickled out of the corners of her mouth. Her face started rapidly withering away, and cracks gradually appeared on it. Qinshin's words echoed in the air. When Su Ming looked over, he saw Qinshin rapidly disappearing. At that moment, her body was like ashes. "This divine clone of mine went against my oath and told you too many truths in the land of berserkers. This is the punishment of my oath. My divine clone's soul disintegrated, but they can't control my real self. Su Ming, don't blame Bai Ling. He is no longer him." Qinshin said softly and closed her eyes. Her body turned into ashes and disappeared from the world. Su Ming fell silent. As a slightly complicated expression appeared on his face, the sword above him charged forward and rammed into his body. But at the instant the sword aura closed in on him, Su Ming lifted his left hand and seized the air in the direction of the sword aura. With a loud bang, the sword aura shattered. With Su Ming as the center, a large area of the mountain rocks under his feet shattered. It was as if a windstorm that could shatter a mountain had swept through the area. And in the midst of an even more intense bang, the half of the mountain under Su Ming's feet completely crumbled. As the mountain was torn to pieces, Su Ming lowered his head and looked at the sword in his hand. It was crimson red and covered in blood. He looked at his robes and his hands. In fact, he could even sense the countless shrill, vengeful souls around him. All of them were the immortals who had died in his hands. A deep wave of fatigue rose in Su Ming's heart once again. This was not the first time he had felt this sort of fatigue over the years, but this time it was stronger than before. Su Ming wanted to close his eyes, but he could not. His expression also changed drastically during that instant. The fatigue in his eyes disappeared, and his breathing quickened, because at the instant the mountain was torn to pieces, he sensed his second senior brother's presence. Without a hint of hesitation, Su Ming lifted his left hand and formed a seal before he swung his arm forward. With it, a violent gust of wind howled and swept up all the shattered stones in the area. In an instant, all the dust that had appeared due to the collapse of the mountain was blown away, and the ground was clearly revealed. This was the land where Great Leaf Immortal Sex Mountain was originally located. At that moment, there was a ball of light that was several dozens of feet big on the ground. The ball of light flickered with a dazzling 5-colored light, and there was a light mist around its edges. Inside the ball of light, there was a black, distorted figure. The figure's appearance couldn't be seen clearly because it no longer had a face. It was completely a black shadow formed by a wisp of black chi. There were 6 gigantic chains inside and outside the ball of light. These 6 chains pierced through the ball of light and were connected to the black shadow, as if they had fused into his soul, as if they were sealing him. The other ends of these 6 chains were buried in the ground. There was also a gigantic rune on the ground. That rune was incredibly complicated, and Su Ming did not know what it was used for, but he could tell that one of its functions was to suppress things. To suppress the black shadow in the ball of light. The entire mountain of Great Leaf Immortal Sect was needed to suppress it at the same time, causing the rune to cause the ball of light to not let out a single hint of its presence when it was under Great Leaf Immortal Sex Mountain. Now, as Great Leaf Immortal Sex Mountain collapsed, this ball of light was revealed. Almost at the instant, Su Ming's eyes widened, and he saw the rune on the ground and the ball of light clearly. He also saw the black shadow in the ball of light distorting as if it was about to shatter. 6 wisps of black smoke that brought with them death spread out from the black shadow and charged towards the rune through the 6 chains. It was clear that the black shadow was not doing this willingly, but had been forcefully sucked in by the 6 chains. The 6 wisps of black smoke fused into the rune on the ground, and in the blink of an eye, they turned into a vast amount of spiritual energy in the world that spread out. Su Ming lifted his head and let out a crazed roar. As his eyes widened, blood flowed out of his eyes like tears of blood. He should have been able to tell a long time ago that the spiritual aura in the region where Great Leaf Immortal Sect was located was much thicker compared to the other sects, but he had never paid much attention to this. He did not expect that Great Leaf Immortal Sect would do something so insane. This was a rune that could turn a certain form of life into the spiritual aura of the world. The 6 chains were the pipes that could absorb that form of life, and that form of life was the black shadow in the ball of light. This ball of light was a seal, and the black shadow in it was the source of Su Ming's familiarity with it. It was the source of his madness. Second senior brother. Su Ming's roar was hoarse, along with his anger and madness. Qinshin's words had originally caused fatigue to appear in Su Ming's heart in the midst of his silence. In fact, he had even stopped slaughtering Great Leaf Immortal Sect. However, once he saw his second senior brother in his body, which was so weak that it looked like it was about to disappear at any moment, Su Ming's killing intent rose once again. Great Leaf Immortal Sect, Immortals. With a swift move, Su Ming charged towards the ground. As he closed in on the rune on the ground in the span of a breath. He lifted the sword in his right hand and swung it down. The world rumbled, and his killing sword cut down on the chain. A great rebound tumbled backwards and rushed into Su Ming's body, causing the web between his thumb and index finger to tear. As blood filled the air, he took 3 steps back. However, even though he was forced back, the chain let out a cracking sound and shattered right down the middle. This chain was definitely not ordinary. If Su Ming did not have the killing sword in his hand, it would have been incredibly difficult for him to shatter it so easily. At the same time one of the 6 chains broke, the near 10,000 people from Great Leaf Immortal Sect in the sky swung their swords down once again, charging towards Su Ming with a loud whistle. In fact, all of them bit the tip of their tongues and coughed up blood. Their blood turned into small blood-red swords under the effect of the sword rune. The near 10,000 small blood-red swords were like a rain of swords, and right behind the huge wave of sword aura, they charged towards Su Ming from all directions. It was also at that moment that a chain broke. A faint sound came from the ball of light, and the twisting black shadow seemed to have been slightly reduced at that instant. It started gathering together slightly from its drifting form, causing the flocculent fog to turn into a person. It might still be an illusion, but its face had become much clearer, revealing a pale but smiling face. It was his second senior brother's face. He looked as if he had gone through unimaginable pain. That pale face was something Su Ming had never seen on his second senior brother before. The smile on his face was still as gentle as it was in Su Ming's memories. He persevered and lifted his head, as if he wanted to turn the side of his face towards the sun. With that smile on his face, he looked at Su Ming. Youngest junior brother. With second senior brother's smile, I ask for recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.